Wonderful. Welcome, open space staff members, open space board members, and members of the public. We are here today for the Open Space Board of Trustees meeting of September 8th, 2021. We will start our meeting by calling the roll of board members. Do we have Michelle Estrella present?
Here.
And Caroline Miller?
Present.
Dave Kuntz?
Here.
Karen Holwig?
Here.
And I myself, Hal Hallstein, am also here. So we have all board members present. This evening, there is one immediate change to the agenda that has been requested. For matters from the department, the discussion on master plan strategy addressing the global climate crisis here and now is going to be moved up into position A, and the discussion of the nighttime hours on Flagstaff Road is going to be moved into position B. So that is one small update to the agenda. Does anybody else have any concerns on the agenda itself?
Hal, if I could just chime in, because the funded research program, item number C is going to be referencing the continuation of the discussion on the climate crisis, because we have a few funded programs related to climate crisis. The flow might be good to have C become B as well. So, but if the board is acceptance of that, we would suggest that we have the climate crisis move right into funded research and then end with the nighttime hours.
Okay. I see no problem with that. Does anyone else have an issue? Okay, great. And for members of the public, anyone tuning in, that does mean the Flagstaff Road discussion will be later in the evening. However, the public comment period, because it is not a public hearing item, will be the point at which to discuss any of these items under matters from the department. And we will do that public comment before engaging in the meeting in earnest. But do want to let you know that the nighttime hour discussion will be moved back in the schedule somewhat materially. So perhaps if you have time constraints, to just consider that. Great. I guess with that, we can move into the meeting proper. And as normal, we start with a look and review and approval of the prior meeting's minutes, which is found on page 3 of the PDF packet. This is for meeting date August 11th, 2021. And as usual, why don't we move page by page? Does anyone have any issues with the minutes, page 1? Great. Seeing none, we can move to page 2. Does anybody see any issues in page 2? Great. And page 3 is a short page.
Hal?
Yes, Dave.
I have some suggested additions for the Greenways update item.
Tremendous.
And I'm suggesting 3 sentences. What I think that item merits a little more detail, and so I've tried to add just a bit more detail so folks can understand kind of some of the specifics of the update. So Leah, can you bring that up on the screen? So what I've suggested adding to the minutes are these 3 sentences. The Greenways master plan update has been postponed and reconfigured as a stream habitat assessment and operating plan based on the need to update the condition index that was completed with previous master plan updates. The Public Works Utilities Department identified flood and stormwater conveyance as a top priority for greenways management, and no major greenways projects on open space lands are planned as part of the 2022 Greenways CIP. And those sentences would be added after the first sentence of our minutes, so that it just adds a little more content to what was referenced as the update.
I'm comfortable with that. Anybody with any issues? Great. Seeing none, let's include that as an additional information in agenda item 7 in the minutes? And barring any further issues, Carolyn?
For that page, right, the line above adjournment, the board additionally asked staff about baseline monitoring and multi-use trails. Just to clarify that a little further, baseline monitoring regarding multi-use trails, or were we, I don't really remember what we were talking about from reading that sentence, if that needs to be reconfigured, just because it sounds like they're two separate things. So if they are, then what is the baseline monitoring?
It's a good question. What were we talking about almost at 11 p.m.?
Are you sure it was that early in the evening? Because 10:43 seems too early.
I truthfully,
I think that would be helpful to have some amplification of that sentence. And since I'm in a different location and don't have my notes from the meeting with me, I can't make a specific suggestion, but perhaps a secretary could go back and listen to the tape and clarify, as Caroline has suggested, that sentence.
I think that would be helpful, just because it's, after the retreat and after Greenways, and it's just not clear exactly what it is we're referring to. So if it would be just possible to place the sort of baseline of what information in there, that would be helpful.
Yeah, my last notes were talking about North Sky Trail from the pre-North TSA baseline, but I don't know if that is factual, that is what that sentence is talking about. So.
Caroline, I think you may be right. I think it might have been a question about a written memo, and we had a North Sky Trail written memo. And Erin, I remember saying she was glad to see that monitoring was mentioned in the memo as a an upcoming activity. And so we talked about baseline monitoring.
Oh, and
just
Casey,
ongoing.
yeah, and Casey talked about all the information in the natural resource survey that was done before the plan was created.
Yes, so I think specifically it was surrounding the future North Sky Trail, if that's correct. But
Okay, can I propose a brief correction then? We leave the sentence as is and then say multiple usage of the North Sky Trail. Is that enough embellishment, or are we seeking to go further? I'm personally.
I think it needs to refer to what the subject is. As Dan said, if it was an information item in the packet, then that needs to be referred to so that it's clear what this was all about.
I have written that monitoring not implemented until 2023. So again, if that was that specific that we were talking about, or if it was something else, I'm not sure. So maybe have them take a look and really see what we were discussing.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful for staff to listen to the tape and kind of be a little more specific, and maybe we can approve the minutes with the caveat that we'll consider, the proposed revision at our next meeting.
I'd prefer not. I'd prefer to close this minutes item without bringing it back if possible. If we are in agreement that this is on the North Sky Trail, I do recall the discussion now, and that was essentially a discussion of, do we have current baseline statistics? What are they? And then there was discussion about the use of North Sky Trail and the board's preference for avoiding regional interconnection was essentially the essence, as I recall. Is that ringing a bell for others? So maybe we could say, the board additionally asked staff questions about the written item on the North Sky Trail and initial baseline monitoring, and stated preferences related to consideration of the North Sky Trail for multiple uses and regional interconnection.
I don't think we talked about preferences for regional connections.
I certainly did.
I think we talked about concerns about regional connections.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Okay.
yeah, concerns about it. Leah, was that clear?
Yeah, so using the sentence that you just proposed, Hal, but changing the word to concerned.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm happy, of course, to go back and listen as well, but if you guys are comfortable with what you propose, then I would use that.
Is there any chance you can just pop it on screen?
Oh.
If not, no problem. Just,
Or maybe just read what you have.
yeah, read what you have is fine.
No, sorry, this, I'm having trouble with my computer. I was not typing it. I was relying on the recording. I understood what you said and but I don't have it written out. Sorry.
Okay. I think we got it, the gist. Does that cover people's concerns here? So with that, as amended, I think unless there's any other items in the minutes, we can seek a motion to approve.
I so move.
Do we have a second? I will second. So we will call the roll. Michelle Estrella,
Yes.
Caroline Miller,
Yes.
and Karen Holwig.
Yes.
So we have a unanimous approval of the prior meeting minutes. Thank you very much, everybody. One small item of note. I learned recently that when you are on mute in Zoom, you can actually press the space bar on your key and temporarily and immediately be taken off of mute. Just a good thing to throw in your back pocket.
Should we put tip of the day after all of the minutes in our template agenda?
Great. With that baseline administration completed, I'd like to ask Allison Eklund to please give us the rules for City of Boulder public meetings, and then we'll move into public comment.
Oh,
Okay, there we go. Thank you for joining us this evening. In order to strike a balance between meaningful and transparent engagement and online security, the following guidelines will be applied to tonight's meeting. This meeting has been called to conduct the business of the City of Boulder. Activities that disrupt, delay, or otherwise interfere with the meeting are prohibited. The time for speaking or asking questions may be limited, and no person shall speak except when recognized by the person presiding, and no person shall speak for longer than the time allotted. Each person needs to be renamed or name themselves with their full name in order to be asked to unmute tonight before public comment. We will ask that you have a name, and if you are unable to rename yourself, you can send a message to me in the chat, and I can rename you. No video will be permitted except for city officials, employees, and invited speakers. All others will participate by voice only. The person presiding at the meeting shall enforce these rules by muting anyone who violates any rule. The chat function is enabled to the host tonight, and that is for technical Zoom-related questions only, not content. Only the host and individuals designated by the host will be permitted to share their screen during this meeting. And when we get to public comment, if anyone would like to raise their hand to speak, you can find that under the participants icon, and then you'll be able to click those little 3 dots at the bottom of that box to raise your hand. Some people are also able to find it in the reactions icon along the bottom of their screen as well.
Great. Thank you, Allison. And with that, we're going to move into public comment. This is a good time for those who haven't signed up. If you would like to speak, to please raise your hand. And I do just want to note again that we do not have any scheduled public hearings on the matters at hand this evening. So public comment would be the right venue for any member of the public to speak to any of the items that are up for discussion, and including any written information in the board's packet. And so, Allison, do we have some pre-sign-ups?
Yep, Daniel Dunn will be up first, and I see Lynn Siegel's hand is up. So Lynn, you'll be right after Daniel, and then we'll look for other hands during that time. So Daniel, you'll have 3 minutes, and you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Could start my 3 minutes, I guess. Hello again, everyone. My name is Daniel. I'm the stewardship manager with the Boulder climbing community. I wanted to touch on the Flagstaff nighttime parking update proposal. We sent a letter to, or I guess first off, thank you to the board of trustees for giving the space to let us talk, and thank you to the OSMP staff for a quick meeting last week with quick turnaround to hear the thoughts of the climbing community. I'm speaking on behalf of the Boulder climbing community and the Flatirons Climbing Council. We do appreciate the time the staff took in the updated proposal, and we do prefer this updated time of no parking 9 to 5 p.m. We do still find that it's restrictive to climbers and other outdoor recreationalists that want to use the resources and the things on Flagstaff Mountain, especially in the summer, given that there's not a large overlap of time between 9 p.m. and when it's actually getting dark. On our call with staff last week, we talked about the idea of a nighttime permit system. That seemed to be well received by the staff. It's something that the BCC and FCC both would like to see, and it didn't seem like there were very many problems that came up during the discussion on our call. In the language to the packet to the board, the language, we weren't the biggest fans of it. Felt like it was recommending just looking into this as an option, and we would rather see the language be updated to direct staff to actually implement a late time nighttime parking permit that would allow folks to get this permit online and stay at Flagstaff later than 9 o'clock. And so, yeah, changing the language to actually direct staff to implement a permit system is what we'd like to see. We'd also like to see the language expressly state that at a certain point in the future, potentially a year into the future, that the OSMP staff would run what would be like an adaptive management type plan and reevaluate not only the nighttime parking rule, but also the permit system if it were to be enacted, and really see if this is actually working to address the original law enforcement problems. Is it working for the climbing community and other recreationalists that want to use Flagstaff Mountain? Does the permit system work? Things like that. And so there's some more details on what we're suggesting, but it's in the letter to the Board of Trustees about our specific feelings about this permit system. But yeah, I would encourage the Board of Trustees to direct staff to actually implement this permit system. We think it's the least restrictive way. It lets folks recreate on Flagstaff, and they have to actually run through a system that is most likely not going to be abused by the folks that are actually breaking the law up there. So once again, thank you to the Board of Trustees for having this moment of public comment, and thanks for having us on here.
Thank you for the succinct comments, Daniel. Next up.
Okay, Lynn, you can unmute yourself now, and I'll start your 3 minutes.
I'm so glad to see that Jonathan Cohen is here and Brett Kincairn. And I guess because of the discussion on climate tonight. And what I wanted to bring up is the confusion in this community regarding CU South. I'm seeing that the arguments are being made are for the same argument is used for annexation or against annexation. And whenever I see this, it's really concerning because it doesn't make sense. I refuted Mark Wallach at length, and you can see that on your thing. I'll send it to you, Jonathan, because I didn't send it to you, and Brett. But it's come up that CU South needs an environmental assessment, and part of this is elucidated in the actual wording of the vote for November 2nd, the initiative under under F, environmental impacts, plans for preservation and restoration of environmental assets in the South Boulder Creek floodplain on CU South and adjacent open space. And then of course, A, I think is most relevant as well. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pollution controls, that's big too. 8, there's 8 parameters that need to be, that the vote is suggesting that the public needs to be illuminated of and weighed in on before any annexation agreement, and separating that we can go ahead with flood remediation. And the common theme has been that the city of Boulder is slowing down the remediation for these people who have their lives endangered, the 2,300 people, but that has actually been CU that has slowed things down by conflating annexation with flood remediation. Now, there's 119 acres that they're giving us of open space, but that is not good open space. I mean, it's good it's good for flooding. So that's not a gift the way that I see it. And it's certainly not, and if you see that any differently, let me know, but it's certainly also a problem to not have a site plan. That's A in the vote wording itself, the text. And to not know what CU is going to do there is huge. We have to know that. Open space has to know that, because we're $40 million in debt right now, in deficit. And then Matt Benjamin, who supports annexation, is saying this is the reason that we need to continue with annexation. No, that's the reason we don't need to vote for annexation. And that's because it's such a huge impact to our infrastructure. And that goes to transportation and open space, especially. So I'm looking at this text, so I need to see the timer. I'm sorry. Is my time up?
Well, your time is up, Lynn. We really do appreciate your thoughts on CU South. Thank you very much for that.
And the climate, mostly.
And the climate as well. Yes, thank you.
They are not they are not separate. Thanks.
Wonderful. Okay. With that, we do we have anybody else? I believe that is all we have on the list.
I'm not seeing any other hands.
Okay, great. Well, with that, we can conclude the public comment. And Dan, I'd like to hand it over to you for a pretty significant matters from the department part of our evening.
Yeah, thank you, Hal. And as Hal alluded to, we made a slight adjustment to the agenda. So we're going to start off by talking about climate action and the climate crisis. This has been a subject that I've been eager to get on the agenda. And I first just want to thank Open Space staff and Climate Initiative staff for sort of answering my call and working over the summer to put together a joint presentation to you all. Obviously, I don't think it needs much of an introduction of why we should be talking about this at the board meeting, but in my tenure, I don't think we've had a very a laser specific conversation on this topic, although a lot of our work over the years has been related to climate action. I don't think we've ever sort of couched it into a specific agenda item. So that was one of my goals tonight, is to give it the credit that is due with this subject matter and the importance of it, and to use tonight's introductory conversation as a jump off point for possible future conversations that we would have with our board. I'm gonna, in just a minute, turn things over to John Potter from Open Space, who will kind of briefly talk about the goals and the subject matter that we're hoping to walk through tonight. But I do want to just introduce a couple of guests. from the Climate Initiatives Department. As Lynn referred to, interim Director of Climate Initiatives, Jonathan Cohen is joining us tonight, as well as our Senior Sustainability and Resilience staff person, Britt Kincairn with Climate Initiatives. And they're going to be giving you a brief introduction on the department and some changes in the department, and then launch right into the subject matter. But before I steal John's thunder, I'll turn it over to John Potter to kind of introduce our plans for tonight.
Thanks, Dan. And Brett, I just ask you to pull that presentation up on the screen if you can. So good evening, board members and members of the public. My name is John Potter, the Resource and Stewardship Manager. And I'll also be joined by Brian Anaker, our Science Officer tonight from OSMP, as well as Jonathan and Brett. We'll be covering 4 areas tonight. Next slide. As we delve into addressing the global climate crisis. And the first of all, Jonathan and Brett will tell us a bit about their work and provide us with some current context for the climate crisis. Excuse me. Then we will drill down on the second item, climate action OSMP efforts, into and review some of the climate related work that OSMP has been doing before discussing some about where we think we might be headed. Finally, we would like to get a sense of what the board has been thinking about with respect to climate change and have a discussion about the materials presented tonight. So I will turn things over to Jonathan now to introduce their department and the work that they've been doing.
Great. Thank you, John. John, can you just verify that you can hear me okay? Great, thanks. Super delighted to be with you all tonight. Mr. Chair, board members, again, my name is Jonathan Cohen. I'm the Acting Director of the Climate Initiatives Department. We know you have a full agenda. We want to get to the conversation. So I'm going to start with some brief introductory remarks. And I would just say as a quick note, the farmer's market's going on behind me. So please let me know if he's making faces at me through the window. I appreciate that. So I also want to start with a bit of appreciation, particularly for the partnership with Dan, John, Brian, and the entire open space department. I think it's important to note that we have really been maturing our recognition of the importance of these cross-cutting efforts and finding the space within the city organization to really work effectively across our departments. So I really wanted to amplify Dan's earlier comment in that my hope is that this is the first of many conversations that we can have together. So I want to just pick up on this thread that really we as a department have been accelerating some of our work and really thinking very strategically about our role within the city organization and the work that we're doing. So in June of this year, we updated City Council on a number of key challenges and insights that have emerged from our community's engagement in climate-based work for roughly 20 plus years. We laid out our approach to really resetting those climate efforts. And so as the title of this item on your agenda reflects, I would start by saying the undeniable reality is that climate change is not just happening, but it's accelerating and it's intensifying. So I'm telling you things that you already know, but putting this in the record is important. That the scientific consensus also recognizes that we're in this situation where the planet's living systems are under severe stress. I think we all know that. A lot of that stems from the destruction of biodiversity, the overexploitation and mismanagement sometimes of resources, and ultimately the breakdown of a stable climate. So we all have participated in this history where Boulder has long led on actions to preserve the environment, reduce our emissions, and essentially tackle climate change, with City Council and the community consistently demonstrating support for those efforts. So I mentioned science earlier. Well, the best science is telling us that we have roughly until 2030 to make the massive societal system scale changes that we know are required to stave off the worst effects of climate change. So in 2019, I'm going to go back just a little bit further, the city declared a climate emergency, and that triggered the development of our Climate Mobilization Action Plan, or CMAP. We use lots of acronyms. Our department then since 2019 has been working on an update to that 2019 strategy, really based on developing a host of new goals that are intended to be formalized and adopted by council in about a month, so in October. But more importantly, we're really focusing on a change in our approach. And I want to talk about those just briefly. So first, we're shifting our attention to what we're describing as the systemic actions by really widening our focus beyond energy systems, which has been our traditional focus, and beyond Boulder city boundaries. I think this really requires a continuation and strengthening of the collaboration with our partners, other cities, with other governmental agencies, and that really helps us achieve impact at a larger scale. And we can point to lots of examples of how we've been able to do that. Second, and extremely important to this evening's conversation, is the increasingly urgent need to essentially reprioritize our resilience to climate change and to address the inequities that climate change perpetuates. So the past months have again provided this chilling reminder of the need to prepare for a new normal of extreme weather events that are fueled by climate change. The overview we presented to council shows that resilience really shows up in two different places. First, as an integral element of how we do everything we do, not just as a department, but what we should be doing as an organization, similar to equity. And another is a pillar of what we do, essentially how we think about adapting to these new norms as contrasted with mitigation efforts or continuing to minimize our impact on climate. So we're also looking into new opportunities for climate action, including land use, how to leverage financial and economic systems in favor of an equitable outcome. And most importantly to tonight's conversation is this increasingly important tool for managing emissions, natural carbon drawdown strategies. So we're working together with other departments, obviously open space and parks and others, to really employ trees, vegetation, and soil to absorb carbon, increase our resilience to climate change. And fundamentally, we're starting to recognize that ecological restoration is possibly the lowest cost methodology for directly addressing climate change. So in addition to revised goals and targets, we have a session with council in early December to talk about the transformative actions that we believe are necessary. And we also know that many of those are integral to climate stabilization, and they can be oriented to quickly deliver valuable community benefits. So I do want to pass the stick to Brett Kincairn, who's been leading much of this work out of our department and for the city organization to essentially kick off the slideshow and walk you through some of the approaches that I've described. And hopefully we can circle back and talk about some questions that you might have. And let me conclude by saying something that I started with. I really hope that this is the beginning of a conversation that we can have with you all. We're trying to have this conversation with other boards and commissions to really elevate the importance and the cross-cutting nature of the work. So Brett, I want to turn it over to you and you can kick off the slides.
Thanks, Jonathan. And good evening to the Open Space Board of Trustees. My name is Brett Kincairn. I'm the Senior Policy Advisor for Climate and Resilience for the city and have been a part of the city's climate team now for almost 10 years. I also am staff to the Environmental Advisory Board, so I know through that work what a remarkable amount of volunteer time and effort that your board puts into this. And I just want to express my appreciation as a both staff member and a community member for all that you've contributed to our community. So tonight I'm just going to take you on a little tour of, in some ways, how climate action itself as a field, especially local jurisdiction-based climate action, is in a state of change. Part of that change started about 3 years ago when this last major IPCC report came out. Obviously, we've seen one more recently, but this 1.5 degree report in many ways really changed the fundamental context of climate action because it delivered several key findings. One was that emissions reduction alone was no longer going to be sufficient to stabilize climate. That in fact, we were going to have to grow to a very significant scale efforts to draw carbon down to stop the already aggravated and accelerating actions of climate change. Another important finding of this report, though, was also that climate change was going to be advancing so rapidly that we were now going to have to shift a significant amount of our attention to preparing communities for these changes. And that really, in a way, has led to a reframing of what climate action is. In fact, when we went to council in June, we said to them, climate action, we used to define climate action exclusively as emissions reduction related efforts. And even I would say sequestration fits into that category of mitigation because it's designed to somehow stabilize global climate. But in fact, now climate action must contain not only that, both the emissions reduction and sequestration, but it also needs to include how we're going to adapt and be resilient to these changes, and how we're going to address the fundamental inequities that our system has built into who is most vulnerable and most impacted by those changes. Now, of course, we've most recently, just literally, was it 2 or 3 weeks ago, seen this most recent report from the IPCC. And I'm sure you've seen this quote from the UN Secretary General, who said, "This is a code red moment for the human species. Alarm bells are ringing at a deafening level. The evidence is irrefutable that humans are causing climate change." And of course, I think, as you know, in fact, 2 years ago, our council was a part of a whole movement internationally of claiming a climate emergency. Now, just what does this mean, and where might we be headed in our own local context? So when we published our last climate action report, we leaned heavily on the Western Water Assessment's assessment of climate change trajectories. And they used an analogy that said under a 2 degrees Fahrenheit increase, our climate locally would be more similar to Pueblo's. But that in fact, in that report, the upper bounds of that was a 6-degree change, which would put our climate roughly into this sort of characteristic of the Albuquerque area. Now, landscapes differ, obviously, but the conditions, which of course give rise to landscape form, are shifting very significantly. So what's causing this? Well, I think we are very familiar with this depiction of what has caused climate change. This is a graph of the emissions that humans have generated primarily out of the burning of fossil fuels that really takes off with the Industrial Revolution in the late 1800s. And you see atmospheric carbon rising to match that. So this has been the sort of accepted sense of what's causing climate change. However, more recently, we've begun to realize that simultaneous to that set of curves, the human species was also beginning to use industrial agriculture and other forms of land management in ways that were also decarbonizing living systems. And so, in fact, there was a report that came out about, or an analysis that came out earlier this year that basically looked, in this case, just at soil carbon and indicated that over the last 12,000 years, our form of agriculture has released something like 133 gigatons of carbon into the atmosphere also. So as you can see, that graph on the right very closely resembles that graph that mapped emissions from energy systems to climate change, or to the change of CO2 in the atmosphere. So the point here is just that I think we have under-recognized the degree to which our land management activities and choices have dramatically affected the climate by decarbonizing living systems. So, in a sense, a really big part of the climate solution is to recarbonize these landscapes. And that's a part of not only achieving a global objective, but actually, as we'll see, has very important local benefits as well. So one thing that's kind of useful to do in a sense is to actually remember that we sort of vilified carbon, but in fact, carbon it's a keystone to all life. I mean, we literally consume carbon 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5 times in my case a day, carbon to just keep us going. That is the fuel on which most organic life both runs and is built. Now, it's also interesting to note that carbon and water have a very close affinity to each other. As we all know, the more healthy your soil is, the more carbon you have in it, the more water it actually tends to hold. And so this is a very important feature in a world in which we're going to have more heat and more water. And we need to be actually managing not only for heat, but we also need to be managing for water. So this was confirmed in terms of the importance of land management and climate action just in 2019, when in fact the IPCC issued an entire report called Climate Change in Land, in which they outlined, they said, remember that the report we just submitted last year told you that we were going to need to rapidly increase carbon drawdown. Well, guess what? The only way we actually know how to do that at scale is by managing living systems. So that's what's followed that, of course, is a whole series of other science. This is a report that came out in 2017 as a global analysis of natural climate solutions. The following year, a US-based natural climate solutions analysis was delivered. But basically, it comes up with this sense that a very significant part of what we need to do now to stabilize climate can be done and needs to be done through how we manage land. So let's think about that now in a little bit more of a local context. And this is very important. What do we get when we start to recarbonize landscapes? Well, for one thing, if we direct that carbon into trees, for example, or shrubs, by the way, we can start to increase shading, which we are going to need desperately, as we have seen from this summer. We can also increase water retention. Now, there's a lot more research that needs to be done around this, but there's a lot of intriguing assessments that show that for small increases in soil carbon, you can significantly increase the amount of water holding in that area. We can also, of course, change the distribution of these extremities by how we create buffering through these vegetative systems. Oops. And we can also increase the increase of biodiversity, of course, from doing that. And then also, we sometimes unrecognized is increasing the amount of carbon in a system can also be managed in ways that detoxify systems. As we all know, there's a significant increase in these toxins from the neonics and others. And finally, and I would almost say this is the last thing we would even talk about, is the carbon that we're sort of counting in our global carbon accounting. So all of these things are things that can actually be delivered into our local environment through managing carbon into living systems. So where we're really going with this is that carbon is no longer, we should not see carbon as simply a villain. We should actually see it as a part of the solution. Yes, we do not want more carbon in the atmosphere, but in fact, we want to capture that carbon and not just put it somewhere where we don't even know where it is anymore, or that we're trying to keep it away. We need to use that carbon in thoughtful and effective ways. So I'm getting close to being done here, but this is a framework that we've started to develop for how to think about what the various forms of landscape-based climate action might look like and where we would act. Basically, that there are these roughly 5 natural areas that we can manage for: forests, agricultural systems, parks and grasslands, greenways and riparian zones. In the coastal context, also aquatic systems are important. And it's interesting to note that the organics, and as cities are a massive conduit of organic materials, both food materials, the other materials from our landscapes and so on, those organics we need to be thinking about and managing also quite carefully, because they can augment and help us do that recarbonization in these landscapes. So just to talk a little bit about some of the work that we're starting to do. Now, this is, about this work quite well. This is my son, Nathaniel. He's standing out on the Bennett property in 2018 as we were just getting started with Lauren Kolb and others to look at what we were going to do out on that site. As you know, we've tried quite a number of different things, from compost to biochar to keyline plowing, and we've been starting to make some real progress out there. Of course, it's actually been a site where we have had to learn a lot about the dynamics of prairie dogs in this process of trying to do land restoration and soil carbon, and that has helped us evolve our thinking as well. Now, I want to just note that this is only the beginning of the places that we've started to work. So this is really in this context of starting to see that the land is one of our critical allies in this climate work. So I want to just talk a little bit about our work in urban forests as just kind of a counterpoint to that work that we essentially started with you in OSMP and the Board of Trustees thinking about in our agricultural lands. So urban forests. Well, how significant could urban forests be in the total context? It turns out quite significant. An analysis done suggests that trees in settlements, that is, trees in any community of over 1,500 people, account for something like 15+% of all the forest carbon that's being captured in the United States. And as we know, in the wildland context, these forests are more and more unstable because of the fire regimes. That one of the advantages in an urban context is that we can keep these landscapes watered, hopefully, and therefore keep that carbon sink in place. We're also starting to realize that, of course, I love this slide. This is from a New York Times article earlier this year, like, oh my God, what technology could help us reduce heat deaths in cities? Oh, as it turns out, trees. So if we actually were to get serious about our efforts to expand urban forests, there's a lot that we could do to address some of these climate change induced threats. And in fact, we'll see, this is one of the things that we've been working on this past year. So the city of Boulder has been an active member of launching both a national regional, and soon coming local urban forestry expansion strategy. So at the national level, we literally have been talking to Congressman Neguse this last week to get him to put markers in the reconciliation bill to get hopefully hundreds of millions of dollars into urban forestry nationally. Over the last 6 months, through a new initiative that the city helped to set up called the Urban Drawdown Initiative, we worked with regional partners to build a front range regional urban forestry expansion strategy. And this coming year in Boulder, we'll launch one of the first climate action strategies focused on urban forestry that I think most cities have ever done. It'll be one of the first times that urban forestry is actually framed as a climate action strategy. So I just want to note that this is multifunctional. So yes, it's about carbon. Yes, it's about shade, but it's also about some very important dynamics around biodiversity corridors and other aspects that we need to be thinking about too. So this is work that Rella Abernathy, that many of you know working in the planning department, has been doing to build out pollinator corridors. And what we're starting to really see is that these are essentially carbon-rich corridors that can serve multiple functions: biodiversity, cooling, sort of shade, and other functions of that sort as well. So this is the work that's been started. Some of you know we've been beginning the first corridors out of the Goss Grove neighborhood, and ultimately we hope to map and develop these corridors across the city. So I'll just close by saying, we all know we're living in a context of great change, and that one of the things that we're going to have to start considering is how our previous planning frameworks built for a different time and a different set of conditions might now need to be updated for the kinds of conditions that we're going to face. And one of those places that we think we are really going to need to start thinking about seriously in the next couple of years is the next major Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan update, which is going to be starting, I think, in 2023, and then is supposed to be completed in 2025. So with that, I would like to turn it back to John and let our OSMP colleagues talk about the really rich work that OSMP has been doing in the climate context as well. John?
Thanks, Brett. That was really great. Jonathan and Brett have really set the stage. You can go to the next slide. They've really set the stage, but we did want to give you a more complete sense of how OSMP has been incorporating climate action into its operations over the years. And if you go to the next slide, really the 5 main areas where the department has been taking climate action are protecting land, of course, acquiring open space for protection and mitigation. That's first. Secondly, we've been building soil, restoring ag land to prevent soil loss and build carbon, mitigating fires. So that's managing forest fuels to mitigate catastrophic wildfire, reducing our carbon footprint operationally, and then increasing awareness and support for climate action through our programs. So protecting land, of course, has been the primary climate change defense that OSMP and arguably the city as a whole has implemented, with an investment of over $250 million in land purchases over the years. This protected holding of 46,000 acres of land means 46,000 acres that, instead of contributing to climate warming through urban development, is instead used to recarbonize the landscape, as Brett put it, and allows us a place to build our soil and vegetation and bring carbon back down into the landscape. So we go back. So we've been building soil on most of this land, whether it's through preserving high diversity, carbon rich grasslands, where important plants like big blue stem are allowed to thrive and develop awesomely big root systems through the soil profile, or through active soil building programs on the agricultural side, where we have recently dedicated a position to soil health, completed a soil health baseline assessment of OSMP agricultural fields, and are now using that to target soil building opportunities with agricultural tenants through applying compost and other nutrients, encouraging cover cropping, and incorporating animals into husbandry practices. In addition, as you know, we've put a focus on the restoration of irrigated agricultural fields to prevent soil loss during arid and windy conditions. Beyond soils, as you know, mitigating fire risk through forest health management has been a longstanding effort in the department that is part adaptive to climate change and also trying to get out ahead of what might be coming. And so since the adoption of the Forest Ecosystem Management Plan in 1999, our work on mitigating fires has led to over 2,000 acres of the highest priority stands in the wildland urban interface that have been thinned across the OSMP system. The crew size and operating budget for forest work has been gradually increasing over the years and was further increased just this year to the point where we are now averaging over 10,000 work hours on forestry projects each year. Reducing our footprint is in addition to protecting the land, building soil, and mitigating fires. We've done facility improvements on many of our facilities, such as adjusting heating and cooling thresholds, participating in zero waste initiatives, replacing gas water heaters with electric, replacing aging HVAC units with electric efficient heat pumps, and incorporating geothermal and solar photovoltaics into our renovation projects. We have also purchased plug-in hybrid vehicles and installed outlets for plug-in vehicles across the system. Finally, the department has been active on increasing awareness around climate action through reevaluating our interpretive outreach and education programs to include climate messaging, incorporating climate into relevant department plans, such as the Ag Plan and the Master Plan, making a point of noting climate as part of root cause explanations in our press releases, and developing more of a climate-related presence on the department website. So that covers 5 major areas of department climate action, but how does it break down from a master plan strategy standpoint? Next slide. So in May, we completed an analysis of the 2021 OSMP work plan to try to understand how much effort was going into climate-related actions this year. This entailed breaking down the strategies in the master plan to determine which ones were climate-related so that we could assess projects across the department. Next slide. This chart shows that many of the strategies in the master plan relate to climate action in one way or another. 19 overall have some role in either reducing carbon footprint or increasing resilience either on the land through stewardship activities or with visitors through recreation management. We consider 7 of these 46 department strategies to be direct climate-related activities, and these are the ones indicated by a red star on this chart. They are 3 tier 1 strategies addressing conflicts between agriculture and prairie dogs, addressing the global climate crisis here and now, and increasing soil health and resilience. 2 tier 2 projects encouraging multimodal access to trailheads, protecting water resources in a warmer future, and 2 tier 3 strategies integrating native ecosystems in agriculture and reducing and offsetting OSMP's greenhouse gas emissions. An additional 12 strategies are considered indirect to climate action and include such activities as indicated by the blue stars on this chart, and include 2 tier 1 strategies preserving and restoring important habitat blocks and corridors across the system, and reducing the maintenance backlog for agriculture and water infrastructure. Also, another 10 tier 2 and tier 3 strategies, which I won't go through fully here tonight, but if anyone's interested, they can check in with me about which ones those are. Next slide. So with about 41% of the master plan strategies being in some way climate related, we wanted to see how that was transitioning, back a slide. We wanted to see how that was translating to the actual work that we set out to do this year. So of the 291 primary projects in the 2021 work plan, 291 projects in the work plan, 140 of them, or 48% of our overall project list, implement one or more of these 19 strategies as a goal of that project. These projects comprise 68% of the agency project budget and 79% of the CIP. In addition, 41% of the department's planned work hours are resourced to these 140 projects. So overall, we found that somewhere 40 to 60% of the department's effort this year is going towards climate-related work. Listed are 5 examples of projects in the work plan that contribute specifically to addressing the global climate crisis. These are among the highest scoring climate projects on total percentage of climate-related strategy as a goal of the project, including regenerating soils on leased properties, participating in the State Highway 119 bikeway effort, implementing forest thinning projects, facility assessment repairs, and vehicle and equipment preventive maintenance. Next slide. So that was an overview of our current efforts at climate action, which if you were taking notes, I guess the take homes are that something around half of the department's work is climate related. And the 5 key themes of this work are protecting land, building soil, mitigating fires, reducing our footprint, and increasing awareness. So now Brian will address a little bit of where we see ourselves headed. Next slide. So I'll start to you, Brian.
Thanks, John. Good evening, members of OSBT. I just have 3 slides for you to discuss where we're headed with regards to climate action, both for short-term adjustments and an update to some longer-term strategic thinking. So in the short term, as John mentioned, we've transitioned 3 positions from temporary to permanent. Each of these 3 positions has quite a lot of climate action built in to their job descriptions: the soil health coordinator position, the prairie dog management position, and a wildlife ecology position. The second short-term change we're making is to develop a climate action reserve fund, which will allow staff to ask for additional dollars to add explicit climate work on top of their ongoing projects, or to create brand new projects that are really directly linked to climate action. As John mentioned, we're scaling up restoration projects like you heard about for the fuel mitigation effort. We're working with ag tenants to make sure their operations are as climate adapted as is possible. And in the next matters from the department, I'll tell you a little bit more about some of our research efforts on climate change impacts. Next slide, please. So in addition to these short-term adjustments, we are also looking at whether or not we need an update to our decision-making framework for land management over longer timeframes. OSMP's approach to land conservation is not unlike most land management agencies. It's one of preserve and restore. When we look at a piece of land, we describe a set of historic reference conditions we'd like to see that land within. When the current conditions are outside of those boundaries, we use the tools of restoration to try to return that land back to its historic conditions. With the rate of global warming and compounding stressors, however, those tools are not always found to be successful, and we're not confident that we're going to always be able to use restoration to have success in this way. This case study I've shown on the slide comes from Sherman et al. From the National Park Service in northern New Mexico, the East Jemez Mountains, where they're experiencing widespread pinyon pine die-off related to chronic drought, compounded with bark beetles and frequent fires. So when Sherman and his colleagues look at landscapes like these, they start to question whether or not they're going to be able to restore these back to pinyon pine dominance, given that it's only getting more arid into the future. And as they were thinking about it, they introduced a new framework, which I think has some direct application for OSMP, called the Resist, Accept, Direct framework, or RAD. for managing lands in the context of rapid environmental change. And as I'll show in the next slide, I think it does capture the entire decision-making space for responding to rapid change. Thank you. Thank you to Left Hand Watershed Center and LV Brown Studios for these graphics. The top middle box is the current conditions, let's just say for one of our ponderosa pine stands, where you've got a high density of trees in the overstory, creating closed canopy conditions with little bit of sunlight reaching the forest floor, little forest vegetation in the understory, and absent are a lot of the indicator wildlife we'd like to see there. The RAD framework tells us we have three choices for responding to these current conditions, which are well outside the historic expectations due to that 100 years of fire suppression and climate warming. Choice one is to try to resist the trajectory of this change using the tools that we have in our restoration toolbox, cutting down trees, forest thinning, adding fire to the landscape, prescribed fire. And in so doing, in the bottom left graphic, you can see we open up that forest canopy, returning sunlight and vegetation to the forest floor. And with that, we get the return of key wildlife. Questions about this approach are, can we afford to do this at the rate that's necessary to get in front of the next catastrophic wildfire? What are we going to do about those forest stands that we can't get into to treat because they're too steep or difficult to access? And moreover, is this open ponderosa pine savanna really going to be sustainable if we're going to be inheriting a climate from southern Colorado or the climate from New Mexico? The second choice is to accept the transitions that are coming. And this would be our no action decision. We let the catastrophic wildfire come through, killing all the mature trees in the overstory, possibly sterilizing the forest soils, preventing any further tree regeneration, leaving in its wake a lot of coarse woody debris and a forest opening. Questions about this choice are we prepared to accept this net loss of forest from the OSBT lands? Are we prepared to accept the possible loss of native wildlife populations and native plant populations? And are we prepared to accept the possibility of non-native species invasion? As we know, ruderal species love to take advantage of these kinds of disturbance conditions. And then the third and perhaps most controversial choice is to try to direct the trajectory of the climate change that's coming. In this case, as we just heard in the previous slide, we can take pinyon pine, which is experiencing die-offs in northern New Mexico. And if we're going to get the climate of New Mexico, we might ask ourselves, well, maybe we should be managing towards something like a pinyon juniper forest type. That's a controversial choice because while pinyon pine is known from Boulder County, it is not on the species list for OSBT lands. So by choosing to introduce it, we'd be bringing in a novel species to the system. And along with that comes all the other uncertainty around what's going to happen. Will those trees survive? What other species are going to come with it? What is it going to do to water relations? What will happen to insects and pests? A lot of uncertainty around that. However, we don't have to make huge decisions like that to direct a transition from a ponderosa pine forest to a pinyon pine forest. We can do this much more surgically, introducing, so let's say we're going to still manage towards a pine savanna, but we might introduce some species that are a little more xeric adapted and that are known from the open space system. We might manage for some component of carbon or structural and composition, but not a whole overturn of these historic conditions. We can just do some parts of it. And moreover, when we have a lot of uncertainty like this, that's where science can come to our aid. And using scientific experiments and demonstrations, we can do this on a very small scale, like we were trying to do with the Bennett project, where we try out some things and see if it takes and see if we are anticipating the consequences that we observe on a demonstration scale. What I like about the RAD framework for OSBT is that it's not an either or decision. We don't have to pick resist, or accept, or direct. We can choose any one of these three. And in fact, all three of them, as the quote says, have a legitimate place in natural resource management. It's just a matter of finding the right places and conditions where we might choose to resist or accept or direct. But by bringing the RAD framework to OSMP, what we gain is a new set of vocabulary for talking about these decisions, but also opening up our minds a little bit beyond the conventional approach of conservation, preservation, restoration, towards the situations where we might have to make decisions where we're accepting inevitable change, or actually making some choices to direct it towards some future conditions. Okay, thank you. That's it for me.
Next slide. Thanks, Brian. That summarizes our presentation on where we are headed, the climate context, the actions we've been taking, and where some of the things we've been grappling with on where we might be headed. Next slide. So now we'd like to get into a discussion and feedback. And so Hal, before I turn it back over to you, these were some of the questions that we were hoping that might stimulate a conversation, and that we'd really love to hear from the board about is really what's keeping board members up at night regarding climate change. And do you have thoughts about the city, the work that Climate Initiative is doing and OSMP are doing for more climate action? And, you know, we'd be really curious to hear any thoughts that you have along those lines. So thank you for your time.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, John, so many folks. This is a very impressive overview from the macro to the micro. Brett, certainly appreciated everything you brought to that. I'm really deeply considering how nicely you touched on so many areas. I guess I'll open it straight up to co-board members about what questions and concerns and what is keeping us up at night on all this. Caroline.
Hey, thanks so much for your presentation, you guys, everyone involved in making it. I do have a couple of questions. So our climate, let me get to the right place on my notes here. So we're called the climate initiatives. Sorry, still reading as I'm talking. So this is what we're discussing is climate initiatives. My question is, in the fund financials for the year 2021, it's actually listed under Climate Action Reserve Fund. And I think that maybe I'm just not following or understanding what is going on within the department for the numbers to have gone down so considerably from what they were in 2020. I'm assuming it's something with the tax, and then why it goes from 2.4 million in 2020 to the almost 350,000 in 2021, which is where it seems to kind of stay up until 2026. Does anyone have any idea what I'm talking about with those numbers?
Jonathan or Brett, are you aware of what Caroline's referring to?
So Carolyn, let me just, so again, Jonathan, again, and I'm gonna see if we can maybe limp our way to an answer here. So I wanna make sure that we're clear when we're looking at, I don't know what document you're looking at.
So for anyone else watching, I'm looking at the 2021 approved budget, page 264, and the title is Climate Action Plan 2021 Fund Financial.
So it's the OSMP budget, right?
No,
Yeah.
This is for I would assume for their department. OSMP's on a different page, not page 264.
Maybe I can answer it this way. So the funds that really underpin my department's work come from a variety of sources. First, yeah, and I think what you're looking at is the general fund. Because our funds come from the utility occupation tax, and that is what funds our energy related work. We also have our climate action plan tax. That's the cap tax or carbon tax, and that funds the majority of our climate work. There is a small amount that is dedicated from the general fund, and that is specific to some waste reduction programs, but we also have a third pot of money that is the trash tax. And so I'm not looking at it. If we happen to go on to another question, I can verify, but I'm fairly certain that what you are looking at is the general fund allocation to our department and doesn't reflect the other funding sources. Because I will just conclude by saying that our overall budget as a department is fairly stable. We are going to be going back to City Council early next year because our cap tax, which generates about $1.8 million annually, most of those funds goes into our programs, incentives, funding much of our energy work, et cetera, and a lot of what Brett is doing. That tax actually expires in early 2023. And so we'll be looking to go back to the ballot in 2022.
Okay, yeah, I'm seeing that on here. So what is your annual budget?
So between the three, and I can't give you the full amount, it's roughly about $6.4 million between the three funds. And so that is again dedicated to the energy work and the Excel partnership. So that's the utility occupation tax. And I can give you the right number just to make sure, and I can either drop it in the text or come back with it. So that's the UOT, that is the climate action plan tax, that is the trash tax, and a small general fund allocation.
Okay, I'll let someone else ask a question and I'll come back.
Karen.
What keeps me up at night is that I see, I don't know whether it's a half a dozen or a dozen city staffers working and doing great stuff like you all have just presented on this. And that the community really doesn't understand either what you're doing, why you're doing it, or its relevance. I've heard you give presentations before City Council on this same thing, Brett and Jonathan. And I know City Council understands it, and I know the kind of people who are part of Energy Action understand it. But then there are another 100,000 residents of Boulder, and the ones that I have interacted with recently have no clue what carbon sequestration is. Even though they've all gone to high school and they've all studied high school biology photosynthesis, they have never put it all together. And I don't think they understand what happens with our native grasslands or forests and how they're sequestering carbon and their value, as John just presented, in addressing climate change. It's not just that we've spent $250 million acquiring tens of thousands of acres, but it's the value of the ecological processes that are happening on those acres that are high quality and well preserved. And I think to address my up at night kind of concerns, we must have a really robust education program that takes citizens, Boulder residents, out on the land and enables them to see and understand and learn about the ways that high quality habitat, as well as cultivated ag lands, sequester carbon and why that contributes to reducing climate change impacts. I think that's a mystery to people. I think they can talk the words they hear in the news and that's about it, based on conversations that I've had with community members. And I think our education department has to get really engaged in this and with adults as well as the children population that they so actively engage.
I think you're really right, Karen. Just to say a couple of quick things. One is, I think that sometimes in climate action, we haven't done a very good job moving out of abstractions like greenhouse gases and tons of carbon into things that are really meaningful and important to people. And that's one of the reasons why we're going to launch a climate action campaign around urban forests, so that we can actually connect people directly to some part of the living world that's actually going to do something in their front yard or their backyard or in the right of way that they can see, touch, feel, and especially stand under and know the difference between when you have it or don't have it. I also just want to agree with you that around education, I think we absolutely have to do as much of that as we can. It's interesting to note that the open space staff was actually having a meeting on outdoor education and engagement today. So I know that there's a lot of thought and work going on in that area. But I also just want to commend you and others for the work that you're doing for the Center for Sustainable Landscapes and Communities, and how that entity has now taken on that biannual reporting on ecosystems trends as a part of the trends report with Boulder County. I think that's another part of that education.
So Brett, what you just referenced actually keeps me up at night. And that is, in a semi-arid environment, what we're talking about, we in Boulder have the luxury of being able to do this, and that is using all the water that we can think of or have in order to deal with some of these climate issues. And my concern is that, especially urban forests, this environment is not a forest environment. And so for me, the urban forest is going to depend on a relatively large amount of water in order to sustain itself. And so I think we're misguiding a lot of the population by promoting the fact that somehow trees are the utmost goal or direction in order to deal with some of these climate issues. And the fact of the matter is that, trees don't grow very well in this environment. And I think that we've got to be far more active about focusing on those, species that actually do occur here. And especially as Brian was mentioning, as the climate variables start changing, we ought to be looking at far more, removal of urban lawns, Kentucky bluegrass lawns that are very water dependent, and starting to look at things that are certainly less water dependent. Boulder is among the Front Range communities that's actually dewatering Colorado. And we may have the luxury of doing that, but I think we better start walking the walk instead of talking the talk. And that's one of the concerns for me, is that I think we are mistargeting what we really need to be focused on. And we know that the native grasslands can sequester carbon as effectively as any kind of woody organism. And we, in fact, ought to be promoting that, because those are the ecosystems that actually have thrived here over thousands of years. And they're the ones that are going to be here, after climate change occurs as well. So I'm really concerned about the fact that, Boulder has a plethora of water, and it's able to do this. But in fact, I do think that we're misguiding on the community in saying that we should focus on urban forests, when in fact, in a semi-arid environment, that's not the predominant ecosystem that survives here.
Yeah, just really quickly, I agree with you, Dave. The one thing I would just note is that, in fact, a couple of things. We are working now to launch initiatives to start supporting people in removing lawns, which are the really big water consumption landscape in the urban context, while also looking at ways that we can create watering systems that can keep the trees alive, even if we were significantly reducing the amount of turf out there. I would just note that that's, it's an established fact that the temperatures in a shaded area can be 10 to 20 degrees lower than those areas that aren't shaded. And that there's going to be a high premium as we enter into these extreme heat periods of having that kind of shade. So we've got to somehow balance that need for basic human comfort and even survival with the kinds of landscapes that we live in. Urban landscapes are by their nature sort of unnatural in that kind of a context. And so it's a bit of a balancing act.
Yes, I agree. And the urban heat island concept is certainly evident here. When we first moved to Boulder a long time ago, very few people had air conditioning, even the need for that. There were very few days in the 90 degrees range that we experienced. And now, without air conditioning, conditions in Boulder, can be somewhat challenging and difficult. And I think, but using air conditioning, basically we're contributing to that whole heat island effect. And yeah, shade is important, but I also think that, the suitable structures also are extremely important. And we have looked at the Northern European and Eastern, well-watered environments that we've all kind of grown up in, and think that that's, where our focus should be. And I think if we're looking at Albuquerque as kind of where we're headed, we might want to look at, how the native people there, survived those kinds of conditions for thousands of years.
Thanks, Dave. I have just a couple quick thoughts I wanted to share. For me, it was uniquely difficult this year that when the UN report came out, we were so specifically choked out with smoke here in town. And I would believe I'm not the only person who did some thinking about that. One thing I'm concerned about is that we support a lot of urban forest sort of interface here in Boulder. There's massive investment in fire management in these areas. Looking at the city budget to explore to what extent we are or are not subsidizing development in the close-in hills and what it is actually costing us to mitigate for fire. And also, I think to be prepared with some basic carbon accounting to answer questions in the community when we're preparing to do prescribed burns, or if we are going to be burning fossil fuels, chipping material to try and remove source fuels from the forest. It just seems like, for me, I find myself, thinking about this more than most, but still deeply confused on what the right way forward in all that is. It feels like just a morass of investment with no improvements seen. And so I guess that's kind of what keeps me up is how fire and naturally occurring smoke plays into this, not only factually in terms of the accounting, but also in terms of people's perceptions. Caroline.
Sorry, I was waiting to see if someone else wanted to talk. Kind of going off of what you said, Hal, about the basic accounting for carbon, I actually feel that it should be as advanced and specific as it can possibly be, because I think that if every city and town in America and every department within those were able to really take a good hard look at what that carbon credit, carbon trading, carbon prices, I think that every single city and town would be broke if they saw what they're putting out and what they're getting back. So I guess my question is related to that. Have we discussed or who that would need to be with a carbon pricing system? I would love to see one for open space, to see what the emissions covered are. There is a couple of new economic reports out that say that the price is around $71 per ton. That's the price of carbon, and even more than that, the social costs are around $100 per ton. So, and there's all different kinds of setups and systems for doing something like that. And I'm sure that the numbers would probably look very scary for any department or even someone in their personal finances. But is this something that when you guys talk about money and budget with the city, that anyone has spoken about being really open to getting real about what these costs are and what it is going to look like down the road? Because the reports that came out that discussed what's going to happen around 2030 are factually true. So the sooner I say the sooner any and everyone starts to really take a line item approach to what they're putting out and what they're getting back, I think the quicker and easier it's going to be to get it under control, if that's possible.
Carolyn, I think it's such an important topic and one that's got some very significant challenges around it. Like, for example, like what would happen if Boulder decided that we were going to impose on our community a cost of carbon in the, say, $50 to $100 a ton range when nobody around us is doing that? And so it's this kind of challenge of the commons, if you will. So we really need to be thinking about how we can engage in that kind of economic adjustment at a larger level where more of the system actually is participating in it. So, but I think that there are ways that we can start taking steps in that direction. So actually, Lauren Kolb, the soil health coordinator for OSMP, has been gathering the data on different methods of assessing the carbon drawdown capability of soil so that we could look at actually potentially building some economic value around that. So we're starting on the soil side with that. On the urban forest side, we've been working with an organization called City Forest Credits to look at actually building an urban forest carbon offset that could be sold, in this case at about, say, $30 a ton, which is about 3 times what the normal market price is, which is, of course, distortedly low. So I think it's a great theme, though, and topic to be bringing forward and to talk about. We've internally to the Climate Initiatives Department, we have been talking about trying to introduce carbon accounting into the city's budget, at least as a starting point of that. And we had been starting to make some progress around that until, of course, COVID hit. And of course, that wasn't going to be a very popular comment or topic of conversation when we're actually already cutting staff and budget. So it's a challenging topic, but I think it's a very important one to have a discussion about.
I think even if, and I understand that no one wants to see themselves in the red, it's difficult to take a good hard look at yourself and know that it's probably not going to be pretty. But if anything, if it wasn't discussed in the method of like key climate metrics and having us really line item what it is, if anything, at least still produce the disclosures to the public, to ourselves, because I would feel it was safe to assume that the city of Boulder and any and every department, again, as well as individuals, I don't know, really what my carbon footprint is, but to really take a look at what that disclosure would look like, to be able to get the conversation going. I completely understand what you're saying. Like, how are we going to come up with these prices that are going to be very, very high and no one around us is doing it? But that's kind of the worldwide problem, right? So if anything, if it's not an implementation of the money, of at least the disclosure of what that would look like if the process started.
And I can give you a starting point, just to anchor to this. The city's emissions overall, the entire community, is about 1.4 million metric tons a year. If that were valued at the current social cost of carbon, at least as is done by the Biden administration, at about $50 a ton, that would be about a $70 million obligation that our community has as a part of the climate debt.
Mm-hmm. And that's not including the social costs as well.
No, that is the social costs. That's at least, the federal government is currently saying that the social cost of carbon is about $50 a ton.
What I've looked at is that would be like the emissions covered, but on top of that, there is the social determinants of health and what we're talking about, exclusion and inclusion and who's going to be affected. and those costs are actually higher than the actual cost of the emissions. That the cost that's a little bit more easily tangible and able to look at what the actual output is. So yeah, I don't know how to get that started. I don't know who in the city greenlights something like that and said, let's really take a good hard look at it. And I really appreciate what you guys are doing for the city of Boulder. It's great work. I care so strongly about what is going to happen to us and everyone in the future that it's difficult for me with anything or anyone to give really any policy a pat on the back if there's not a lot of really good, hard, factual looking that it's going to be really uncomfortable, because that is where, you know, every human is right now on Earth. So.
And Caroline, one thing that may help you here is one thing that Dan has asked us to look into for next year is to do a climate audit of OSMP. So like, it was kind of that same question. What could we be doing better, more intelligently for ourselves as a department? And it was trying to do that accounting, not necessarily just from a disclosure standpoint, which I think was a really good point that you made, but also from a prioritization standpoint. So where could we be doing more, both on the cost side and the drawdown side, to do a better job for the city?
Yeah, I mean, and there are a lot of carbon pricing systems and credits and ways to go about doing that kind of thing, depending on the type of work that you're in. And I just think that Boulder has such a good reputation that it would be really wise for us to look into it and see what type of programs that are out there would be good for us to start doing that kind of thing, because that really puts into it really magnifies like what a true budget is at this point, because that really is what humans need to be worried about is what we're, you know, pretending as we're, you know, closing our ears and eyes and saying this is what the numbers are, and we all know that that's just not the truth.
Can I share a quick point here? I'll try to make this very quick. If I should ask the chair if that's okay.
Yes, please, Jonathan, go ahead. And then I've got Michelle after that.
Great, thank you. This is such a great line of conversation. And Caroline, I so appreciate you bringing this forward. A couple of key points that I wanted to make sure get brought into the conversation that kind of are sitting in the margins. First of all, what we've talked about with you tonight is not the totality of our climate work. We have been so focused on energy, which is our buildings, obviously. What are the levers that we can pull there that have the biggest impact to decarbonize? Thinking about our transportation systems, thinking about our economy. And where we've been most successful over the past couple of years is that systemic or systems level change, where we are going to the biggest levers. So going to the state legislature, going to our regulatory agencies to address those big levers. One of the things that we were successful at is getting our utility to act, getting our Public Utilities Commission to in fact impose the social cost of carbon on regulated utilities. That I think is really helpful in our maturation of our thinking, because it allows us now to think about setting the right floor. And what I mean by that is traditionally we have treated climate change as a math problem. And while that invokes the inner math geek in all of us, the reality is you can't just look at this as, well, if you just look at this amount of tons over here and you try to offset it over here, that really misses so much of the rich dimension that exists. And what I mean by that is that part of our learning has brought us to this place of how do we accurately and honestly measure our emissions? And so what we discussed with council this past June is moving towards a consumption-based inventory, which really calculates and captures the emissions from goods and services in Boulder. And it's a really tough conversation because it potentially has the potential of doubling our emissions, but it's the honest way of accounting. So we are partnering at the regional and national level to pilot a way of true cost accounting, true emission inventories that allow us then to go internal to, say, the city organization, to say, what would it look like to actually do a social cost of carbon within the city organization? How would we use that to underpin all decisions, all investments, and all projects the city makes? And that is where I believe we are headed. We are starting to have those conversations internally amongst the departments, but it's been kind of this appendage for some time. And I don't say that terribly negatively, but the way we have traditionally approached climate and sustainability and resilience is an appendage, something that is thought about after the fact, which is how can we kind of layer on some of the more sustainable features. And I have to really appreciate my colleagues and the rest of the organization and the city leadership really taking a hard look at how we embrace climate in a much different way and recognize that it's no longer this slow moving issue and it's something needs to be embedded in our long-term planning and discussion. So that was not necessarily a very eloquent response, but I just wanted to share with you, this is an ongoing conversation. What you're dropping as a comment fits very neatly within a thread that is happening right now. And Caroline, while I'm speaking, I wanted to come back to your earlier question, and I would direct you to page 79 in the budget, and that is a full breakdown of our budget. And I was pretty close. 6.3 is our 2020-22 budget.
Okay, I appreciate you saying all of that, and I think that. Like I said before, all of the work that you guys are doing is great, and it's so difficult, I think, for your department to try and, like move the beast that makes all of the wheels turn, water, utilities, the city itself, energy, all these different things. So anything that open space can do to help you, hopefully we can make that happen. For you guys, anything that you need, but it makes me happy to hear you say that. And again, it's just so important for me to say what I think, because, 2030 is looming, if not sooner, if not, so it is at the point where being as direct as possible is just really the only way to get things done at this point, I feel like.
Thank you. Michelle, I know you've been in the wings here.
Thanks. So speaking of 2030 is looming. My kids are set to graduate in 2030, which blows my mind. But what keeps me up at night is the world that we're leaving behind for my kids and future generations. And this hits me pretty hard. And with all of the news and what's the reality of climate change, it is extremely overwhelming, especially when you're thinking about the future generations. In your presentation, you touched on things like multimodal transportation on trails, two trails, and upgrading of vehicles, which are all great things. For me, I'd like to focus, because it is so overwhelming, on the things that I can actually impact personally. And, one is modeling, good practices, environmental practices for my kids. The lawn, that really resonates with me. I hate to water my lawn, and I'm trying to move to xeriscape more and more. And for sure, emissions in transportation. We have such great bike paths in this city. That's something that we can control. And we can all get out of our cars, those of us who live in the city, and get on a pedal bike or an e-bike in my case, as you all know. And I wish that we could encourage city staff to take a little extra time when they need to go to meetings. Take a little extra time. It's good for their health and well-being to get out in the city and use our bike paths, as well as replacing vehicles with electric vehicles, and really reminding all of us that we have a very good solution in front of us in impacting those emissions. So this is all great conversation. I want to thank you for bringing it up. And I know that everybody kind of talked at a macro level. I just wanted to bring it back down to a micro level before we close this topic. Thanks.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, I really think this was very, very engaging and interesting. For me, there's also a circularity. The very people who dreamed up this open space system were deeply concerned about growth. And they knew that GDP and carbon were related. And for one of the things that Boulder does exceptionally well, I think, is not cause its neighbors and co-residents to constantly be playing the keep up with the Joneses game, thinking about how our department can model that, thinking about how we model that to our neighbors, and recognize that consumption and the demand for new is a big part of the culture that has caused the explosion in carbon. And it's just really interesting how that's been there for since we really put the charter in place. This has been underpinning it. So everybody's time really doing all this hard work. It's just we're fortunate to be keeping that tradition alive. So thank you, everyone, for all this great work.
Thank you, Hal. Thank you, board. Really appreciate your engagement on this topic, and I'm sure we'll be talking about it more soon. Jonathan and Brett, really appreciate you coming by tonight.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. Thanks, Jonathan. And thank you, board, for that great discussion. I knew the subject matter is very emotional, and I think we felt some of that. And when we're talking about our children and our future generations, I mean, we know what they're facing. And, you know, part of our goal is bringing this up was knowing that a half-hour presentation from staff was going to fall woefully short of really getting into the subject matter at depth. But we did feel it was important for you to be introduced to the Climate Initiatives Department, to introduce you to Brian and John's work in early 2021 to do an inventory of what's related of our actions and our work plans. And then to take, John alluded to, the next step is to do that climate audit, if you will, next year in order to say, well, what should we be prioritizing? What should we be enhancing in terms of action? Brian hit upon that little climate fund we're going to experiment with to try to get staff to think a little bit bigger and out of the box and to make some proposals towards that climate fund and give that a go as a pilot project. So we're certainly open to future discussions with you all, and we'll look for those opportunities. But thanks to Jonathan and Brett for kicking things off at a city level, and for Brian and John for helping to prepare tonight. Really appreciate it.
Great. And then Dan, you said we might naturally move into funded research prior to moving to Flagstaff.
Yeah, we'll bring on Brian now. He's got the screen on, and of course, a couple of his of the projects he'll talk about relate directly to the conversation we just had. So we will go into item from Madison Department, item C at this time, if we're ready to roll into that.
That's great. Thank you.
Hold on a second here.
So for those who don't know, I don't think we actually properly titled Brian. Anyone listening, Brian Anneker is the science officer for open space and mountain parks. And he is our point person into the funded research program, which has other collaborators and agency partners in this growing and exciting program that we launched a few years ago.
Hello, thank you for the introduction, Dan. Tonight, I've got an update on the 2021 funded research program for you. And before I begin, let's see, I'm going to bring up Zoom just to see where you guys are. Cool. I just wanted to acknowledge Will Keeley, OSMP wildlife ecologist. Will and I worked really closely on this project over the years, as well as about 15 other staff members who help us review the proposals we receive each year and make funding decisions and ultimately sponsor the research over the field season. Excellent. Next slide. So the funded research program at OSMP is a small grants program We issue awards to scientists in the range of $5,000 to $10,000 each on an annual cycle. It's been going over 25 years, starting in 1995, with the main goal of working with scientists in our community to help OSMP address our short and long-term management needs. In this photograph, you'll see a mix of graduate student, undergraduate students, and staff out on an OSMP property in the south part of our system, where we're looking at the impacts of drought from climate change on grassland health. The shelters you can see in the background intercept rainfall as it's falling from the sky and run it off, droughting out the grasslands below them. And then the graduate student and undergrad measure the response of the grassland community. That's just one example. Next slide. Here's our master plan scorecard, which you already saw tonight. This funded research program has 2 direct connections to the master plan in Ecosystem Health and Resilience 7 and Responsible Recreation, Stewardship, and Enjoyment 9, which are to develop a learning laboratory approach to conservation and recreation. And then through the research that gets done, the program touches about 17 other master plan strategies, which I've indicated here in blue. Next slide. We take the branding that we came up with in the master plan fairly seriously, which is the learning lab approach to science of conservation and recreation. As you can see here, a story that we got out in the Daily Camera over the summer titled "Look in Your Backyard, Boulder Open Space and Mountain Park Sponsors Research Projects." In the inset quote, you can see the author describes Boulder's learning laboratory approach to conservation. Next slide. So 2021 was another really strong year for proposals. We received 14 proposals asking for funding, which is right on average. Of those, we decided to fund 7 projects for a total cost of $66,704. One of those 7 was Brian Buma's project, which was funded with an interagency mechanism where Brian was able to triple his budget and triple the amount of land he was working over. So it's just an example of the collaborations we're forming with our sister agencies to the north and south. Next slide. This table shows all 7 projects. The 3 with asterisks, I'm going to talk about one slide each, but I'll leave this slide up for a second so you can peruse the titles and affiliations and get a sense for the diversity of topics and affiliations that we have in this single year alone. Projects on climate change, native plant species hybridation with non-native plant species, looking at recreation ecology studies from principal investigators at CU Denver, CU Boulder, graduate students, consultants, agency scientists at USDA, etc. Next slide. So Brian Buma is an assistant professor at CU Denver. His project title was Fuel Treatments and Their Impact on Carbon Stocks and Fire Severity. His research sites are on all 3 of our lands. And the main question he's looking at, to some of our early discussion, is are the carbon losses that come along with our forest restoration, meaning when we cut down trees and we use prescribed fire, those are losses of carbon from the system. Are those less than the carbon losses that would have come if we had a catastrophic wildfire? Kind of a complicated question, but the way he's going to approach addressing it is to look at above ground forest structure in treated and untreated stands, stands that have burned and other stands that have not burned. And he's going to look also below ground for the first time at what's going on with soil carbon stocks. So this is the first look at the carbon accounting in our forested landscapes. And by looking at repeat measures and spatial contrast in these treatment histories, we can start to describe how our management interventions are impacting that carbon balance. The photograph you can see in the background is taken from Hile Valley Ranch. It's an untreated stand of ponderosa pine that was burned in the Calwood fire last October. And you can see just a wall of standing dead trees there. Next slide. The second project we're excited about is Anna Paraskevopoulos. linking species distributions and thermal physiology to understand climate change impacts on ants. She looked at this old monograph from work conducted in the 50s, published later in 69, in the Gregory Canyon area, 30 different sample sites where Brown and Gregg captured ants, collected them, identified them, and described their conditions that they preferred in terms of where they're found on the landscape. She's going to relocate those. You can see on the modern topographic map on the right, she's drawn those circles and superimposed them, and go back and resurvey all those plots. The original sampling discovered 45 different species of ant, which is an order of magnitude higher than I would have thought we had in terms of ant species diversity. She's going to go back out and recollect at those sites. She's going to take her collections over to the University of Chicago so she can compare her collections with the original collections, which are housed there. She's then going to torture the ants to understand their thermal preferences. How high of temperature can they tolerate? How low of temperature can they tolerate? And compare that thermal trait to the change over time between these collection dates of the 1950s collection and the 2021 collection, and see if it's a good predictor. If the heat-loving ants are the ones that are the most abundant now, while the cool-loving ants are the ones that are disappearing from the data set. This particular project, all of that work is getting done for $2,000, which blows my mind. And next slide, please. Okay, this is the third and final highlight coming from Dave Theobald, a consultant out of Fort Collins, testing and modeling patterns of visitor use from mobile big data. One of our goals is to understand the visitor experience and to improve the visitor experience. We've heard in the ether all this conversation about big data and information coming from our mobile phones. So we worked with Dave to start looking at those data sources and seeing if we can add that to our understanding of visitor use. So what we did was collect data from a third party, which harvests the georeference location from your smartphone as you move around. Whether you know it or not, your XY coordinates, lat, long, are getting sent to the cloud, getting processed and resold, and then used by businesses and groups like us. So we got a small sample for the Chautauqua area, which included thousands of different devices and pings. They're called these individual fixes of lat long as you move about. And we had hundreds of thousands of pings in this little geography for the year of 2020 alone. Working with Dave, we created some heat maps, which I'm showing on the screen here, where the yellow indicates high ping density, medium is in red, and low is in blue. And what we're seeing is really good signal coming from this mobile data, where we can see a faithful rendering of our trail corridors. We can see relative use levels that make sense to us, where the Chautauqua Trail is lighting up. The trail out to Royal Arch is looking relatively popular compared to some of the other trails in this geography. We have a good proof of concept that we can see use of an undesignated trail. That's a well-known undesignated trail, slated for eventual designation, but it's a good evaluation for us that this data can see it. We also are seeing great correlations of this data with our ongoing visitation estimates, where we have single pinpoint trail counters on the system. When we take a look at the pings in and around those trail counters, our correlation values are quite high. But of course, what we gain by using the mobile data is this really rich mapping of visitation outside of those single access points in a way that we've never been able to look at it before. So our hope is that we can bring this into the fold of visitation studies and use it to augment the work that we already do, counting visitors and also doing visitor surveys. One last thing, the most important thing, the animation is showing change over time. So here we're going into June, July, visitation is relatively high, it's peaking. And then as we get into December, January, visitation is coming down. So spatial resolution is there, temporal resolution is there as well. And next slide. One of the funnest parts of the project is to watch peer-reviewed publications come about that have initiated through research at the Small Grants program. The last 3 years alone, we've got 16 peer-reviewed publications that we know about. And here's 4 from 2021, including an asterisk for those papers that include 1 or more OSMP staff authors, including myself, working with Tim Seestead, Tracy Hallward, and Ann Lesberg on a study of soil carbon and plant species diversity in grasslands. We have a paper here on recreation ecology, human impacts on wildlife, spatial and temporal refuge, and even a study on compliance with social distancing during COVID times. Next slide. So next steps for this project include the issuing of our request for proposals in November, and then we'll make our awards in February in time for researchers to get their field season plans in order. And we're currently planning our 3rd installment of the Front Range Open Space Research Symposium. We've done 2 of these already. This one is scheduled for April 2022, date and location to be determined. Boulder County Parks and Open Space will be hosting this edition. And this is an opportunity for all of our former grant recipients to come and present their work to one another, but the community is also invited. It's a really rich full-day conference. COVID willing, we will be able to do this in person. If not, we'll explore virtual options. Next slide. If you want to learn more, here's a few different ways to do it. You can find links to all of these at the Science at OSMP webpage, which we talked to you about, I think, when we did our master plan annual report. That's your one-stop shop to learn about all things science. The OSMP funded research program webpage is a place to go to apply for one of these small grants. The Journey into the Outdoor Learning Lab is a story map, which is a really fun, interactive way to hear about the funded research program. And then the OSMP Independent Research Reports webpage is where we've cataloged the 300 or so papers that have come out of the department over the years. And with that, I'll take any questions. Next slide. Thank you.
So anybody with questions for Brian here on this presentation? First off, thanks, Brian. It's great. Appreciate the nice selection and drill down on all the individual projects. And it is remarkable that ant research, that's very creative and interesting. Also, personally happy that the questions I asked about fire mitigation are being looked at and carbon accounting. So that's very exciting. Caroline.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know if I have a question. I just wanted to say thank you, Brian, for all of your hard work and what you do. That was really, really informative. And I've been super excited about the science department and everything that you guys have done with the new website. So that was just a really great presentation. And I appreciate so much what you do.
Thank you.
Dave.
Thanks, Brian. I have a question. Budget-wise, is there a line in the budget for the research program or small grants, or how is money allocated to support those projects?
Yes, we have an annual budget of $70,000 currently. One of the climate accelerations we're considering is whether we want to showcase climate research in a special way and ask for a little additional funding to have a narrower track application process specific to climate related questions. So that might be one way to augment that small budget for a very specific purpose. The way that money is allocated now, it comes through my work group. So it comes under my purview. And then we do a staff, as I mentioned, review of the proposals that come in. And we have at least 3 readers for every proposal. And we do a pretty detailed scoring mechanism for the proposals. And then the final decisions are made as a consensus of that group. And very often we will make adjustments if the 3 readers have a consensus, but the other broader review group feels differently, or we look at the portfolio of projects and we need to break ties, we're always able to get there. And in a couple of cases, for example, the CSTED work, we chose not to fund it as a grant and we funded that as a contract. So sometimes we'll find additional dollars when we want to have a little more control of the research or a little more back and forth with the researchers. So we'll bring different funding instruments to the table as that makes sense.
And I think the annual symposia are extremely valuable and interesting. So hopefully we can resurrect those and continue to have them. Having said that, though, I was going to suggest that, if there's some projects or study results that you think the board might be particularly interested in, I think it would be highly informative and interesting to, ask the researchers to come and present the results of their studies to the board as just kind of an informational item. And I think the board would benefit greatly from that, and hopefully the public as well, kind of getting some of that information out in public forum.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And I have been talking through the Center for Sustainable Landscapes and Communities, picking a couple of the grant recipients, including the Brian Booma project, but a historic one from Kyle Rodman and Tom Veblen, to bring to a broader community type of presentation or a keynote address outside of the symposium, possibly this fall. So that could be another way of, when we have really exciting topics or really great research results, bringing special events forward for the entire community to hear. But I will keep that in mind too, that bringing folks out for a Wednesday night might be a great way to share research results.
Yeah, great, thanks.
Or just you, Brian. You can just come hang out with us every month and do whatever you do.
Brian, I also, on a technical level, I wanted to say the story maps in ArcGIS and the introduction to the learning lab you did, I think is absolutely fantastic. And I want to know what sort of time investment, whether the department has a subscription to that facility, and are we department-wide planning to ramp up its use? Because I really think that it does environmental community engagement at an absolutely fantastic level.
Yeah, thank you. I think they're really exciting too, because they move beyond the inform only and they move to the interact, which is a great way to keep people engaged, especially for complicated topics. The way it works for our department is through Esri, which is a company that provides ArcGIS online. And through those licenses, we can develop story maps. How easy are they to build? It depends. You can build one pretty quickly. You could build one in an afternoon. It wouldn't be a beautiful thing. You could build one, you could spend 4,000 hours building one if you wanted to. But my sense from working with Ann Lesberg, who built that one, is it's pretty intuitive, and it represents, I think, the way that science is going forward towards these low code or no code software solutions, where formerly you'd have to be a real master technician to pull something like that off and get the level of customization that you get. But now those tools are all point and click, and they sort of have done a great job of pre-canning the code in ways where they anticipate what the most common uses are going to be, and they make them available for you. In terms of our department, I think I've personally seen maybe 6 of those come through. And as a gallery of story maps, they really represent a wide range of utility and functionality that that the software can bring. And so I'm really excited about them. I think that's definitely a way forward.
Great. Yeah, and Dan, I guess just even Karen's points earlier about soil, carbon, and that cycle. This tool just strikes me as a real gift to organizations like ours. So that's a really, if other board members haven't done it, the introduction to the learning lab, you can get a feel for it. It's really fantastic. Does anybody else have any questions on that? I guess seeing none, Dan, we're ready to move into the next segment here. Thank you so much, Brian, for the presentation.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. That was really well done and really interesting. Thank you so much for doing that. So we are going to be bringing back a subject matter that we started discussions with the board last month, and that is last month, just to do a recap for anyone who's listening in that wasn't part of last month's meeting. The board actually did provide a motion to amend the BRC language to sort of provide uniformity for how the parking hours across OSBT parking areas are stated in the BRC, and to also added some language that allows some flexibility for adaptive management if we see that one or more parking areas need adjustments from the standard 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. No parking hours. So that action was taken, and that will move forward to the council. One of the actions that is sort of left over and that we're bringing forward tonight is how we intend to use that flexibility, and to daylight the fact that we do see sites along Flagstaff Road in which we do intend to make some hour adjustments. And so we'll move into continuing that discussion and some of the feedback that we've had with community members and some adjustments we've made to our thinking about that, and to summarize where we're at that point. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Burton Stoner, I believe, our ranger supervisor, to get things started for tonight. Or is it Mark? But I think it's Burton.
You got it. Good evening, everybody. Burton Stoner, Ranger Services Supervisor. Hope you're well. Let me try sharing my screen here, get this going. Gretchen Boulevard, lead ranger, will also be joining us as part of the discussion tonight. So, how is that looking?
You did it. You cracked the code. We're off.
All right. Very good. Now let me get it to. All right. Is that look great?
Looks great.
Okay, super. So we are back for an update on this topic, and we really just I'm going to start us off and then turn it over to Gretchen here. We have created, I believe, a win-win solution here, proposal moving forward, and we have a good balance between the recreational use, also allow for protection of public safety and the natural resources. So again, this is going to allow for continued use of all our property for the activities like those listed there. The new proposal is going to combine the changes in hours to support law enforcement with a parking permit system. They'll be coming online, as well as then supporting the recreational activities mentioned above. So this updated proposal was worked out with our community partners, specifically working with the FCC and BCC in some great conversations that we had. So we're really looking to be a pilot project for 12 months till the end of 2022, and then we'll work together to make any adjustments as needed. So Gretchen.
Thank you, Burton. So we're on to the next slide. Yeah, so just to recap super quickly, the reason why we're here in the first place, and that is just to go over the problem statement. As you recall, I was the ranger that brought the original proposal last time, and I talked about kind of 3 categories of issues that we see on Flagstaff. And so the first category being trash and litter that comes from nighttime use. So that does cost money and staff and volunteer time to clean up. That seems to be increasing lately the more we see nighttime use pick up. It decreases the visitor's experience. Obviously, when you come to a trailhead and you see trash and litter or beer cans or broken glass or that sort of thing or graffiti, it kind of takes away your experience. It can also attract wildlife, when takeout containers or broken glass are left outside, that can bring wildlife closer to human interaction and put them in danger. The second category of problems that we see increase at night is alcohol and marijuana violations. So that can obviously lead to trash and litter, because if you're drinking or smoking and you're maybe underage or know it's illegal, you don't want to have that in your hands. You might leave it where you were. It can lead to DUIs and other public safety issues. Obviously, that's a very, very big concern for us. And it can, again, decrease the visitor's experience. So maybe seeing the park as not typically as a safe place to be, or just knowing that illegal activities occur there. Serious crimes also occur at night. Some specific ones that we've seen lately are armed robberies, fraternity hazing, graffiti, DUI, death, etc. Next slide, Burton. The original proposal that was brought forth last time I was here to address these issues, as you recall, was to limit the parking, not usage, but just parking along Flagstaff Road, to say no parking 1 hour after sunset to 1 hour before sunrise. Again, just along the trailheads and major pull-offs along Flagstaff Road. Open Space received feedback from the community and the Open Space Board of Trustees and reviewed this original proposal and considered alternative options. With this new proposal, we want to ensure continued use of open space property for activities such as stargazing, climbing, night hikes, etc. Next slide. The path forward is to sign the same area that we had talked about originally, Flagstaff Road, at the trailheads and pull-offs, to no parking 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. To come up with this alternative, this new path forward, Open Space staff reached out to, as you can read there, many different community groups and members. So not only the board members, but FCC and BCC, like Burton talked about, the Boulder Public Lands Coalition, Colorado University, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Flagstaff House Restaurant. Open Space staff and rangers will review and implement parking permit options for people that request to park on Flagstaff during these no parking hours. As a reminder, all users can always still access trails and climbing and bouldering areas along Flagstaff and Stargaze. We're not closing trails or property. This is a parking issue. And this proposal only changes the hours one can park along Flagstaff Road. As always, with any of our other permits, and this one included, any violations of the permit can result in a revocation of that permit. Oh my goodness, the light just turned off, I'm sorry. Burton, next slide.
Thanks, Gretchen.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. So again, thanks for that recap, Gretchen, and lining this out. So again, quick reminder that we will review this as a pilot process after 12 months, make any adjustments as needed, working with the community on this. And as things come up during it, we have such I believe, a really solid dialogue with the climbing community ongoing. And so just if there are significant issues that come up that we can work through as we go along with the parking permit process. So again, we're looking to support law enforcement issues up there with this parking permit system that will come online to support the recreational activities mentioned above. So the intent in our memo was to just ensure that that we will be creating a parking permit process. That's all we have.
Great. Thank you very much for the update. Are you seeking some questions and feedback?
Yes.
Great. So let's those who had concerns from last time around, Karen.
This is an umbrella concern with the department's actions that are labeled adaptive management. And I'd love to see it applied to this kind of project as well as all OSMP projects that say that they want to use adaptive management. I think we need to get clearer about what the adaptive management steps are or might be by stating what the goals of the project are, that we want to, if we're running this as a one-year pilot project, saying these are the goals that we'd like to achieve, And if we achieve these goals, we want to consider making the pilot project permanent. If we don't achieve the goals, what are the intentions? So that everybody knows going in, you know, what the expectations are and what the consequences are of meeting them or not. And when I read like the Department of Interior's definition of adaptive management and how it's applied by that kind of a large, well-researched institutions, they make it very clear that that's the format to use for adaptive management. So I would encourage you to do that, and just as an information item on one of our next agenda packets, attach that so we know what your expectations for this pilot are, and they can be made public as well.
Really appreciate that, Karen. We will do that and take that under advisement definitely to get that set, as well as so the specifics of the parking permit system. We would also do that at the same time.
Thank you.
Dave.
Oh, Dave, you're muted.
Well, yeah, so Burton, what you just said, I guess I have a question. It would be very helpful if you or Gretchen ran through kind of what you envision the permit process to be and kind of how that would work and who is actually responsible for it. I think that would be very informative for the board to understand kind of what you're envisioning.
Sure, I'll take a quick stab at it, and Gretchen, if I miss anything, let me know. But so we have a lot of good experience to draw from with our permitting process. You know, we have a very efficient special use permit process. We have some annual permits that are related to the fee system, and as well as research placards that we use for people's vehicles, for our research vehicles. So we can draw from a lot of really good programs that we already have in place and staff experience that are so our permit folks as well as our rangers will work together to create this new thing. And you can look kind of rough outlines, looking at an annual pass sort of thing with some sort of placard and a simple, easy application and tracking mechanism really are kind of the key steps, I think, to make this work for rangers to enforce in the field. So that's a super quick overview, but we will definitely provide some more details as we work those out.
So there, the website would, you know, along with the other permit application processes, presumably have this as well, so that there's kind of a step-by-step process that people have to go through in order to be approved.
We'll look for a very simple kind of process like that. Yep, something like that, Dave. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thanks.
Michelle.
Yeah, Burton and Gretchen and Mark, I just want to thank you for all the work that you've done and reconsidering your proposal, and you, Allison, too, for reaching out to the climbing community. One minor correction and some comments, some questions. Flatiron's climbing community rather than Front Range climbing community, something that I saw on your presentation. That FCC actually stands for Flatiron's climbing community. But thank you for reaching out to them and working with them. And kind of along the lines of what Karen was saying in terms of adaptive management, but how do we measure success of this? And how do we sort of tease out, you know, this idea that, or it's not idea, I'm sure some of this is related to COVID, and you know, not to pick on CU students, but or underage drinkers, but you know, they were not able to party last year together and to get kicked out of school. So I'm sure that they were hauling up to this, you know, these 5 miles away from the neighborhood to go party up there. How can we sort of tease that out, and like how much of this was happening at 11 o'clock versus 9 o'clock, so we can measure the success of the program, of the pilot program. I'd like your thoughts on that. And then also, You know, with the parking permits, I know that in the memo you mentioned annual or seasonal permits. I do just want to make sure that we do give, you know, one-off permits, make those a possibility for folks who want to watch, you know, a particular Persed's event and not really have to get a permit for the whole season. And then, you know, that other example I used on the phone of that romantic who wants to wants to propose to their significant other under the stars up there, just giving them the ability to do that legally, you know, within the confines of this new permit program. Other things is I imagine that there will be a cost for the permit. And I know that I try to navigate the website a little bit. I'm not sure what you're thinking in terms of the cost of the permit. But I'd like to just make sure that we think about this also in terms of JEDI principles and making things accessible to the broader community. And, you know, not thinking about just those folks who have the privilege and the affluence to live so close to the trails and live here in the city of Boulder. Yeah, so, and then I think to the point of the email that was sent yesterday to sort of align what you have in the memo versus what you're telling us today, which is that you're not just going to explore the feasibility of a permit program, but you are going to pursue it.
Yes.
And I know you're going on record as having said that here. There's just a bit of a disconnect with what was in the memo itself. So I know that was a lot, but I wanted to just give that to you and let you respond.
Yes, thank you. First, I want to apologize to the FCC. That was a error on my part. So the flat irons, thank you. I will change that in the presentation and remember that for next time. Thank you. I heard what you said about the one-off permit idea, and I look forward to following up on that with Burton and Mark and taking that into consideration. Absolutely. In terms of the conversation about if it costs money, I absolutely hear what you're saying. I know some of our permits cost money and some of them don't, like the HCA permit. So I think with that one, I again look forward to having that conversation with Burton about making sure, you know, considering what you said about not having it be cost prohibitive to some people. Yeah.
Great, I'll jump in on that too. I think in general, this looks like a very good direction to me. I am concerned that over time, as we proliferate a little bit on permits, that essentially we have a single web page where links to all permitting processes in the department are available, just so that there's a single one-stop shop to understand what permits are offered and quickly and easily able to point people to that. And that additionally, perhaps we explore in the MAP app also having that single point of contact for permits, just to make sure it's not too hidden from folks. And also, as you're exploring this permit process, and I can only imagine over time that similar things will arise, that if there is any way in the free permit process to basically integrate a simple verification. I'm always impressed when I use Park and Ride in my EcoPass, how I can use a license plate number, because we are essentially talking about parking, and they can determine if I'm in and out of district quickly, which also verifies I'm a real registered driver, that basically something could be done to issue the permit immediately on a self-permit, on a self-print basis, to not only reduce staff needing to touch the application, but to really make it a quick and satisfactory process for those that go through it. In any case, those are just a couple of thoughts on my mind. But in general, really appreciate what you guys brought back on this update.
Thanks, Al. Been taking notes. We will definitely review those. Thank you.
Dave.
Hal, those were good suggestions. I completely agree. Burton and Gretchen, I had a question. I was a little confused in the memo, the section on the city attorney's office responses. Can you provide a little more context for them? Because particularly using the word city, I guess, our efforts were trying to clarify the ordinance, and they seem to think that those efforts added more confusion to it. And so I'm wondering if you have any better or more detail as far as what they're thinking.
Yeah, I think the response that I got from the city attorney's office was pretty succinct, and I think that might be mostly what was in that memo. If we're looking for more information or more detailed explanation, I can review with Burton and Mark the email that we got from the city's attorney's office and just make sure that we're giving you all the information that we got as to why they have chosen not to accept those two changes.
Let
me just jump in real quick. So I guess from my perspective, Gretchen, we were, as I recall, trying to make a distinction between the Open Space and Mountain Parks Department and the Parks Department. And I still think making that distinction is warranted. So I'm a little concerned about that, whether their response doesn't really address that distinction. And the other thing on the use of the word city, we could just as easily put city owned or something if the concern is outside the urban, designated urban area on, city-owned property. I think what we were trying to make sure is that all the mountain parks and open space property was included in the ordinance, either inside or outside the city limits. And so it strikes me that we could easily use the term city-owned, and that would be less confusing from their perspective of just using the word city. So I don't know whether you talk further with them about that, but we were trying to make the ordinance language clearer, and they seem to be satisfied with the way it was. So.
I think there is actually a board-wide learning moment here on this, at least the way it was communicated to me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is essentially when referring to the lands themselves, that we would use open space in an uncapitalized way. And when referring to the department, we use a capitalization, and that consistency is desired in the BRC, which is good for us to know as we're working on motions in the future. And it strikes me that one way around this is to refer to lands managed by the Open Space and Mountain Parks Department, which then becomes capitalized. In any case, is that the correct rough understanding of what's written in this memo?
Yeah, I believe that's correct, Hal. And then to get to your point, Dave, that you're right, that one part about separating parks from OSMP, we can follow up back with Janet, our city attorney, on that.
Mark, we couldn't understand the word that you said.
Apologies, I'm using Gretchen's mic.
Oh, you guys switched.
Yeah, Gretchen, you sounded awesome tonight.
Yeah.
And Mark, not so good. So what Mark said,
Great,
Dave, is
Gretchen,
that
Mark really did.
Is that we'd be happy to follow up and have a discussion with the city attorney's office about your point about that is making a clear distinction between the two departments, and see if we can land on some language that would fit their template and fit your desire. But ultimately, just so you all know, it's going to be city attorney office's final call on. They're the ones who actually write the language for all the BRC stuff, but we'd be happy to bring that conversation back.
I just want to make a plug for not using the term open space with lowercase letters, because the planning department uses that term for areas without buildings in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Unfortunately, this is already baked into the BRC, and so I think it's a steep hill for us to attempt to climb. Maybe we should talk to planning about changing their ways.
Good luck.
Yeah, we'll be climbing that hill for a long time.
On an undesignated trail.
Yeah.
Any other final comments and points here on this item? Caroline?
Yeah, I just have something quick, and I'm sure it's a thought that we have all had, but kind of circling back to what Karen was talking about. You know, it would be quite a disservice for the climbing community who does so much for Boulder and sustainability and really keeping areas nice, for them to be kind of put out and then have to buy a permit. If in fact, you know, I heard someone say during the presentation, or it was written in here, that parking is the issue, but parking really isn't the issue. It's like the method that we're using to try and curb the issue, which is, you know, unsafe hazards, encroachment onto wildlife areas, and really the main thing is like the use of alcohol in these places. So I do think it is a good idea for us to make sure that we look at that, because if the appeal of what Flagstaff is for CU students or whomever is out there doing these things, and it becomes easy to get an Uber drop off or a ride from someone else, and nothing really changes. They just realize that parking there can't happen, but the spot is still a pretty cool place to party. That we kind of recognize that sooner than later, and you know, appropriately figure out a way to move forward in another direction.
Clever thought.
Well, one thing I'll just point out on that is even if it's a free permit, but it's based on people having a license plate number, my general experience of being a college student would be I would never offer my license plate number when planning to go throw a party with alcohol. So at least there is some natural deterrence within that alone. Burton.
And if I could, thank you, Carolyn and Hal, appreciate the comments. Because of the existing fee system on Flagstaff related to where vehicles are registered, I think that would be the mechanism to continue that process for as a fee, and probably have this as not a fee related issue, is kind of where I was starting from in my head. So just to share that.
Great. So if people are comfortable with that feedback, Dan, will you just describe essentially we have the BRC updates on track in the process. You're going to return to discuss with the city attorney a little bit on the language. And then at some point, we will basically hear back that some of this is being implemented, or is there another stop in the road that I'm not seeing?
Yeah, no, I will outline just a little bit the specific date that we're planning to bring this to council. So council action will be around the BRC change, but at the same time, we do feel an obligation to daylight the fact that we're going to be using this new language in this way. And so the memo will fully describe the conversations we have about Flagstaff. So council will be fully aware of our intentions of using the BRC changes at the time we ask for the BRC change request, which will hopefully still be able to be completed under this council, so before November. What I'm also hearing is that we will aim to have a written memo description that talks more about the permitting program and provide some more details to the questions that you all raised. And so we'll come back at some point, and Gretchen and Burton and Mark, I'm throwing that out there. I believe we could probably do that before the launch formally of the program, is to provide a written update on the permitting process. So those are what I see as over the course of the next couple of months of getting ready for. And then of course, staff will have to do some more thought around Karen's questions about how are we going to measure success. We'll come back with some more information. It could be also with the permit information about a flow chart or an adaptive management sort of paradigm of of how that process is going to work in terms of judging success of a pilot program, whether or not we've failed, whether it's succeeded, how we know that, and getting that information back to you as well.
And the consequences.
And the consequences, yeah.
Thanks, Dan. I just want to comment on that process piece a little and touch on something Karen has raised. I think that, you know, and especially in the email we received recently about permits and fees and codification, just to make sure when we do present this to council, that we're not unintentionally binding ourselves in ways that we don't want to be, because fundamentally, the more, obviously, BRC codification is the antithesis to adaptive management, but basically offering the option of council review on things consistently, which we're really, in fact, trying to recover for ourselves as adaptive management items, is a little bit contrary to that goal. So hopefully we can provide the transparency without giving up our own authority to adaptively respond to problems on our managed property. I think you know what I mean in that overall scheme.
Yep.
Yep. Wonderful. Anything else on this particular topic?
I guess the only thing, maybe this would be a head nod, but it would be nice if within the memo we could describe that we've heard general support for the concepts from the board. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but the feedback is generally receptive to this strategy and this pilot program. And just we probably would want to document that within the memo.
Great. Should we do a brief show of hands? Can I see a hand showing from board members who are in generalized support, including the recommendations that we've offered in this discussion?
Yeah, I support it, assuming that there'll be included some statements about natural resource protection, as opposed to just about parking and behavior.
Okay.
Agreed.
Is that enough to work on, Dan, with that note and that asterisk there?
Absolutely. Well, I just want to thank the team that's been working on this over the summer, and for the Rangers to daylight the issues that they were seeing and how they have tried things in the past, and they are running on solutions, running out of solutions, and wanted to bring this forward. So, and for the adaptiveness of our staff on being open and willing to hear from great community comments that we got. And I opened up our discussion last month by just wanting to acknowledge the positivity of the discussions that have taken place between our community members and the staff. And it was really great to see. And I think we used that positivity in a way to create a good solution here that we'll be looking at over the 12 months. And after all of these initial written memos describing some of the details of it, we'll of course come back to you and share with you some of what we're learning and seeing. So
Wonderful.
And thanks, Gretchen. Thanks, Mark.
Yes, thank you, Gretchen. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Burton.
Thank you.
Dan, if you can do your verbal updates in about 15 minutes, we could actually be ahead of schedule here tonight.
Well, I'm actually not going to take 15 minutes, but I do think that there's been a lot of little and large actions that the board's been taking over the last few months that are either before council or have gone through council. So I just thought I would just take a minute or two to just kind of recap what's still coming up for council and what has been completed. And being completed at the council doesn't mean the actual project has been completed, but that approval step has been in place to allow us to move to completion. So in terms of what's ahead, September is going to be full of CU South annexation, the application and the council's consideration of that. So I know I probably put these dates before you, and I know you all are tracking it, but September 14th will be the night of staff and applicant application or presentation, as well as the public hearing portion, and also clarifying questions from council on September 14th. They then will be reconvening a continuation of this item on September 21st, in which they will be moving into the deliberation format, and hopefully they're hoping to have some sort of decision made on the 21st. So that's CU South. In terms of the budget, where that is resting is on September 28th. There'll be the first reading of the 2022 budget, and October 19th is set for the second reading with the decision making in terms of the budget. It actually, those two dates are actually mimicking what we'll be bringing forward with the BRC change and the description of how we intend to use that new flexibility on the nighttime no parking hours. So September 28th, first reading, October 19th, second reading. We're working with the CAC to determine what type of format they want it in. Regarding the format, it will be a nice, extensive, thorough memo that will be provided to the council. And let me see, I think that kind of council talks about what's ahead in terms of open space and council. What's been completed through the last month or so is the East Boulder ditch easement to facilitate the Fisk Passage has moved through council. The Raytheon Trail easement has moved through council. The BRC changes regarding the no alcohol has moved through council. The updated IGA with county to provide code enforcement officers to offer parking tickets close to open space areas is moved through council. The Sombrero Marshland exchange and the land acknowledgement. So a busy past couple of months and a busy month ahead for council in relation to open space issues. So just thought it would be nice to take a minute or two just to kind of recap where we're at with some of these projects that have been brought forward to you over the course of the last 3 or 4 months.
Thanks, Dan. I see Caroline's hand up. I have a comment too. Caroline?
The two easements that you talked about, Dan, will that have anything to do with this action items matter from the department in November that says real estate services program update, including conservation easement program update? Did those two easements that just went through have anything to do with that?
No, the conservation easement program is, so we have about 8,000 and some change plus or minus acres that are protected, that are in private property, that are protected through conservation easement agreements that the open space department is charged with overseeing and managing. That would be different than the East Boulder ditch easement a little bit, and the Raytheon Trail easement. So those are a little bit different of easement animals than what we'll probably be focusing in on at the November, which will be really talking about the more traditional conservation easement program. And of course, we'll start off with an explanation of the definition of what that is, how many we have, and how they help protect our lands.
Great. Thank you. On the CU South topic, just quickly, I wanted to mention here publicly in this meeting and for the benefit of other board members, there have been a lot of changes to the annexation agreement, of course, and it's hard because these changes are not provided in track form. It can be very difficult to follow what has been done. And I do want to draw everyone on this board's attention to changes in the most recent version of the annexation agreement related to the de-annexation clause and the requirement from permits from various federal agencies. I personally am a little bit disappointed that language that included that the land be successfully delivered for the flood mitigation project as a term of de-annexation appears to have been removed in the most recent version of this. And it's very difficult for me seeing that, given how much time and effort I spent trying to educate people about the importance of the topic for this board, essentially I can't help but read it as them saying that our board, as an environmental review board on this project, which has spent more time than anyone else in the world, certainly more time than any federal regulator, FEMA, etc., will spend on the project, is somehow less relevant or uninteresting to City Council and to the other people negotiating this agreement. So I just thought it rises to a level where I wanted to voice my dissatisfaction with that. I know it won't be a popular view. I don't imagine my co-board members will be pleased to read it. But because this is coming up so quickly, wanted to take this moment to say, in this non-redline version, get your spectacles out and see what has been done in that particular area.
I share that sentiment, Hal.
Thanks, Dave. I'm not exactly sure at this point what to do. I've spent a lot of time seated, looking eye to eye to plenty of people on this. And so, yeah, haven't really decided what actions are appropriate or inappropriate, but needless to say, it's, I think, going to create problems that they don't anticipate fully or understand fully. So I'll leave that there. Dan, do you have any other verbal updates, or are we moving into matters from the board?
We're moving on.
Great.
And I'll jump in because it seems to be me every meeting suggesting this. If the board would like a 5-minute break before we move on to matters from the board, if that's where we're at, or if we all want to keep going.
Let me try this out. Is there going to be some questions and commentary on anything in the written information from board members? If so, let's take a quick break. If not, I feel like we can do the OSBT retreat subcommittee in reasonable time. Karen, yeah?
I do plan to make comments on written information A.
Great. Why don't we take a very brief 5-minute break? Let's come back and rejoin at 8:59. Thanks, everybody.
Well, we're all here, Hal.
Yes, and recording has begun, so welcome back. And we move right into matters from the board, and that is a report and update from you, Dave, and Caroline on the OSBT retreat subcommittee.
And if Dan is available, we'll want to include him as well. So, Caroline, do you want me to start real quickly and then you jump in? Okay. We had several questions for the board that we thought we should kind of get clarified tonight. And so we talked with Dan about some of them, and he was going to do some follow-up to see if we could get some further information. The main one related to the meeting itself. And so I think we've settled on October 20th as the day. And the question that we'd like to go over with the board the questions are several. One is, we think that the retreat material probably is longer than a 3-hour meeting. And so we wanted to find out if board members were interested in doing what would basically be an all day, but maybe a 3-hour break for lunch, 3-hour morning, break for lunch, 3-hour afternoon meeting, in order to kind of get through all the things that Caroline and I think that we should consider. Or alternatively, whether people were more interested in 2 half-day meetings, kind of back to back, so that there would be a morning or afternoon session on 2 consecutive days. So That was one question. The other one was that, and Dan, I don't know whether you've actually found out, but Caroline and I were definitely interested in a face-to-face meeting. And so we wanted to find out if that's possible. And we're very eager to make that happen if we can. So we just wanted to check with other board members and see if you had any thoughts or opinions on that as well. So those were the kind of the two main meeting questions. And so I guess, Dan, I don't know whether you want to jump in and add anything else at this point, or?
I've had a preliminary discussion regarding board and council in-person meetings. You're not going to like the initial response, but council, of course, has decided to delay its in-person meetings with no specific date in mind. And what I've asked is, have there been any boards or councils that have gone ahead of council and met in person? And the answer has been no. So then I said, well, is there any creative solution? And that's where we left it to discuss. One of the things, well, right now, I guess we're assuming that there'll still be a mask mandate in place. So if we did something where the board was in person, but the public was tuning in, then assuming that we'll be in a sort of an indoor situation, I guess, and to have the technology available to do the Zoom, we all just have to be aware that if we sort of get the go ahead to do something of a hybrid type of situation, and I'm not saying that's a possibility, but let's just say, we're going to have to be in a mask situation for the day. So that's one consideration. But I'm following up with some more conversations, Dave. It was just a preliminary conversation I was able to have this afternoon, and it kind of left a few unanswered questions for me that I need to follow up on. So
great. So does anyone have any thoughts or ideas on those two issues?
Sharon.
Two comments. I went to a Parks and Rec conventional kind of open house. Might have been in June or July, out at that building by EcoCycle out on Pearl, whatever that is called. And people were wearing masks, but it was a conventional open house with about 100 people in that room, just like we've done for the last 10 years or more. And so I know those kinds of meetings are going on in the city, and I would assume that we could do something based on that.
Yeah, that was sort of my follow-up on that, Karen, is explaining, well, we did do the outdoor
and the field trip. Yeah,
the field trip. And so what a retreat, is that sort of one of those gray areas where so that's one of my outstanding questions that we didn't have time to get into.
And I personally would be okay with either half days or whole days. I have no idea what my personal situation is going to be like, whether I could be there in person or whether I would need to tune in. But I certainly understand the desire to want to do it in person.
Michelle.
Yeah, I think I have, as you know, 2 kids that are not eligible for vaccination, and meeting in person is not something that I'm willing to risk at this point in time. So I would be opting for the hybrid option versus an in-person option, as much as I would love to get together. And then secondly, I do think that 6 hours is a lot to ask for a retreat. I will say that at my work, we recently had a retreat, all vaccinated, also required testing in my backyard. So there's only 5 of us. And what we did is we distilled down 5 days worth of agenda into 2 days. And we did that by, really being deliberate about what we took on, but also doing some level of pre-work. And that helped facilitate a lot of the conversation that we were able to have within those 2 days. So if we really feel like that's, an entire day's worth of stuff that we absolutely should take on, I would, request that we get some level of pre-work sort of out of the way. Like if we are taking on certain topics, that we all sort of jot down our thoughts and share them, and sort of hold each other accountable to doing our homework. And that moves conversations along pretty smoothly, efficiently.
That's a good idea. Michelle, I think what Caroline and I did, and we appreciate the suggestions that everyone sent in, and Dan had staff prepare a spreadsheet. And so what we attempted to do is to, incorporate these suggestions from board members kind of into a, kind of a general retreat format. And so what we initially thought is, well, there's some kind of, functional, how are we doing kind of conversations to have on various, specific aspects of the board's work. And so that would kind of be, the administrative or, the check-in and, making sure that everyone's got some kind of contribution or understanding of how they think things are working and that sort of thing. And then we thought that a really major issue was the visitation levels and kind of impacts from visitation, and how we're going to deal with both increasing visitation and impacts from that. And I kind of saw it as what I termed the conundrum in the box, in that the conundrum is that we're getting a lot more visitation, which is what we really want to encourage. The other aspect of that is that there are impacts that are associated with that. And the box is that we apparently have limited, answers or options to deal with some of those issues. So, have a really robust discussion about how we think that we ought to be handling, increased visitation. And including in that is then the recreation management plan process and, a conversation with staff on that. And then the third major thing was, the focus on the future is kind of what is the overarching message that we think the open space and mountain parks program really needs to carry for the next 50 years. And, talk generally about, what we think that should be and what that includes, so that there's kind of a wide-ranging conversation on, okay, where do we think the community understanding of the open space program and mountain parks program is, and what that should mean going ahead. So anyway, we thought those kind of three major conversations would probably be an hour or two each. And so that was kind of why we thought that, we might want to look at a longer time frame than just a half a day. So, and Caroline, you jump in. I probably missed something that you want to make sure that we talk about.
No, I mean, that's a good point. And we all know that our meetings go long. And Michelle, you do have a really good point about doing some pre-planning work and having all of us get on the same page as much as possible prior to it. But when you said that, it kind of made me think about, we can do the pre-planning work to try and have a shorter retreat meeting. But in the big picture, it is one day or possibly two split up, whatever we all decide, per year for the entire year for, the Open Space Board of Trustees. So it's kind of like the pre-planning for the planning for that one day, but that one day is kind of our framework for the entire year. So I just want to, make sure that we don't miss anything and that everyone has a chance to really speak to whatever level they need to, and we really kind of get ourselves sorted for the upcoming year.
Personally, I'm comfortable. I really feel like you guys have done a great job putting this together. I think 6 hours would be a lot easier for me to conduct in person than not in person. I get the difficulties surrounding this, but at some point, work has to continue and life has to go on. And so I'm of the mind that with a small group like this, attempting a retreat, that we would seek to do a meeting of that magnitude in person.
And we were thinking outdoors,
Yep.
where you can really spread out and all of those things.
One area one place we were thinking about was the Flagstaff Nature Center, where we could be outdoors theoretically, or if the weather were inclement, we could be indoors but socially distanced, either way. And so anyway, it was kind of like, well, there may be venues that we can use that can meet the needs of all of us, and hopefully that's true.
But I'm also happy to switch the location if for some reason like the Wi-Fi isn't good there, and everyone gets to have their personal choice. If that's just not a risk Michelle's willing to take, that's completely understandable. And then also, if Karen, whether she decided to or not, if she just wasn't in town, obviously take that into account too for both of them.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to look at the technologies that are involved with supporting this meeting, because it will definitely be a hybrid if we're able. And I would say that Michelle's concern is going to be resting with individual staff members too, who may feel more comfortable participating in a hybrid format, or who may participate but may not be in town, like Karen's situation might be. So we'll need the technology to support a hybrid meeting if we're able to, sort of get the go ahead to have some in-person element to this. But just keep in mind that with that as city employees and an extension, the board here will be adhering to, all the mandates that are in place for masks and that sort of thing. And so, and if we're able to have an element of in-person, we would put that clarification out well ahead of time to make sure everybody was aware of what the situation will be.
Can I ask Hal, Karen, and Michelle, if we all decide to extend it over the 3-hour meeting, could each of you pop on the mic real quick and just say if you would prefer for it to be a 1-day or a 2-day back-to-back with whatever you have going on with your schedule, if you know right now?
It doesn't matter to me whether it's 2 half-days or a full day. I'm assuming that I can figure out a way to make it work. But we haven't said anything about the public, and it has to be a publicly noticed meeting, right?
That's right. And another reason for if there was an element of in-person and we were able to sort of get the go ahead to do some creativeness, it's going to have to be a hybrid situation where we have the technology to present the meeting as well. Before Michelle steps in, I'll just say, so when Dave asked about the extending it beyond, I think we were originally thinking something like 8:30 to 12:30 or something like that, is to have a good break at lunch. So those trustees that have work and family obligations and those staff members that need to kind of keep track of the day's events, that we would have something from like 8:30 to 11:30, a 2-hour break, come back, and then 1:30 to 4 or something like that would be sort of what an all-day thing would be. So there'd be a couple of hour break at midday and get everybody out, hopefully in time to take care of some after school obligations or work obligations at the end of the day.
So Hal or
yeah, I'm comfortable with, I'd probably prefer a single day meeting, but I can do 2. And my viewpoint on this is being influenced by what I'm seeing in a nonprofit board I serve and other places. I just get a little confused at a certain point. If someone is deemed to have the flu in the year 2024, are we going to say that anyone who feels unsafe no longer has to attend those things that they are either employed or committed to in their volunteerism? At some point, a line does need to be drawn, and I'm enthusiastic about conducting the business of the city.
So
And-
how are you feeling?
I want life to move on as well. That's unfortunately not the reality that I live in today. But I do hope that we're going down that path. I mean, my kid had a sore throat today and last week, and like got tested like 4 times. I mean, it sucks. I mean, it absolutely sucks. Unfortunately, that's the reality. I don't think we're quite there yet. At least I'm not quite there yet. And I would really just encourage us, if we can do some homework, or you give us those topics, because a lot of time is spent on pontificating or coming up with ideas. And if we know what those agenda items are and we have homework, I do believe it can be compressed. However, if you really feel like you need 6 hours of work time, for those of us who do have full-time jobs as well as family obligations, if I had to choose, oh gosh, what day is that again? That's October
20th, Wednesday, the 20th.
Right.
October
Just the
20th.
week after the board meeting.
Yeah.
And if it's hard to do right now, you can, if we're popping this on you and you just need a few and answering right now is difficult, then you can circle back around to us when it's easier.
Okay. And I mean, because I guess we'll have to post this fairly soon if we are going to split that up into 2 days, or either way, we'll have to post it fairly soon. But yeah, I'll connect back with you, but I can make it happen either way.
Okay.
So why don't we'll proceed? I think what we would like to do then is we'll start crafting a draft agenda and maybe get that circulated to board members so you can take a look at it and see what you think. And so by the October board meeting, we should be definitive on whatever it is we're going to do. And so staff would need, kind of a couple weeks probably to do whatever they need to do. So we will be in touch in the next couple of weeks with, some suggested kind of a suggested agenda, as well as some suggestions as far as how we might do some pre-retreat work to get up to speed on whatever the topics end up being.
Hey, are we allowed to, like if we were asked to think about and jot down several ideas around these topics, are we allowed to share that on like a shared platform, or is that, that's probably right. I mean, that's probably violating open meeting rules.
Well, I think what we'll do is we'll suggest that you send your suggestions or comments to Dan, and then Dan can distribute them to the board. And so
we can do it, Michelle, we can do it in a format where if we put it in we can have a section where you can just put your notes into that, send it right back to me and something.
Okay. And then like the night before I can read Dave's thoughts on this and have some, some idea of where he is on a particular topic. I love it.
Sorry. So we'll look at kind of the topics and timeframes, and probably get back to you. And again, we'll have to kind of decide whether it's a 1-day or 2 half-day deal. But we should be able to do that relatively soon. And then we'll proceed from there.
Do you want to poll right now what half days might work?
Well, we were thinking that we would keep the 20th, since we've all kind of agreed to that, and then look at the 21st.
I have 2 conflicts on the 21st is why I asked.
Yeah, and Dave, I didn't have my calendar when I talked to you today, but a number of us that will be at the retreat have an all-day meeting sandwiched with another commitment over the lunch hour. So I'm just looking, I'll be with the whole D team from 9 to 11 and then from 1:30 to 3:30 the next day. So
on the 21st?
Yeah.
So everyone's kind of more leaning towards Tuesday and Wednesday if we do it that way.
Maybe we can do the 19th and the 20th then.
Well, Hal, you've always told me Tuesdays aren't good, but I don't know if that's the case in this case, but.
Tuesdays are not preferable, but this is important business.
But in hearing all of that, it seems like if we do extend, then the one day is really going to fit everyone's schedule the best. Does that seem accurate?
So why don't we do this? We'll hold that thought until we hear from you, Michelle, on what you'd like to do, and then we can kind of decide what works best. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. I can pull off all day on Wednesday, or 6 hours on Wednesday.
I mean, it may not end up being 6 hours, but it will probably end up being more than 3.
Will it be 9?
Yeah, yeah. Well,
You've figured out how we work, haven't you?
We'll reveal that on
Such a quick study. 10:43. Not thinking.
Shoot. Yeah, we've got surprises for you. Okay, Caroline, are we good on that?
Yeah, I think that's most of the house cleaning stuff. If anyone, if the other 3 board members, after tonight's discussion or moving forward, think of something that they think is important to share, feel free. Don't feel like you're gonna, really mess up the schedule. I think it's really important for all of us to say what we need to say during our retreat, because that's really kind of our time. So, or if you get sent something and you think of another way to kind of turn it left or right, then just let us know and we'll make it happen.
And just so you know, Caroline and I and Dan have a meeting on the 21st to kind of get things in a final form. So 2 weeks from this, yesterday, I guess, will be the time that the 3 of us put our heads together. So we'll shoot for trying to get some substantive groundwork done by then so that we can start making some final decisions. Are we good?
Thank you. I think those are really important topics that you've identified, and I'm looking forward to us getting together and agreeing as a group on some priorities and direction.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, and thank you to all of you for the suggestions. We've tried to incorporate all of them in some fashion as part of the whole retreat conversation. So we'll keep working on that.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Caroline. That brings us to any final items and questions before we adjourn the meeting. Karen, you believe you had a couple related to written information.
Yeah, I have some concerns and questions about the voice and tag program written information document that was attached to our packet for this month. And I would like to request that we place that item on the October 13th agenda, specifically for attention to adaptive management pieces in that item and master plan priorities. I don't want to open it up to every and anything, but I'd like to open up a conversation about it regarding the master plan priorities and adaptive management.
Okay, Dan, I know we have potentially some real estate business that's being added to that agenda.
Yeah, we do. I don't know the scale of it yet. Bethany will be back in town next week to provide me with the details, but she did confirm that she, and so I went ahead internally and put it on the agenda. I would imagine.
This is something that's not in our packet, that right?
That's correct, right, yep. It was something that I hinted to Hal that we might be seeing come down the pike this fall. There's a couple of things out there that are stewing, and so I think that and one of them is definitely going to be landing in your laps. It's not a big item, but it certainly is going to need attention. And Steve, I just saw you hop in, but I'm also wondering, and maybe Steve, you're going to ask it too, is get a little clarification. That's a big subject matter, that whole master plan strategy. And so I'm just wondering if you could pinpoint a little bit within that of what your particular interest is. So staff has an idea of what you're asking.
And Dan, if I can also.
Steve.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, to you, Karen, I think is Dan's question. And I would just add to Dan's is if you are, as part of that, do you need any additional information from staff, or is this just creating the space for a discussion?
Well, in my ideal world, I would hope it would lead to some revisions to the staff document.
Okay, revisions just to the information we reported out about actions, or when you say the staff document, the memo that we've shared, or something else?
The written information A.
Okay.
And I have absolutely no intention of going back and revising trail study area plans. I understand what trail study area plans are about.
Okay. And maybe this is something too, Karen, is Dan, if we look to put that on the memo, I can touch base, or we can touch base with Karen offline and just know, and maybe I'll be able to help set that conversation up if need be.
Yeah, what I think what Hal and I would need to know when we touch base on the agenda is, you know, what the scope of it is, how much time it is in relationship to the other items that are going to be on the calendar, just so we can create a sustainable meeting. So yeah, if we can get some sort of sense of, yeah, the scope of the item, that would be great. And yeah, Steve, if you want to follow up with Karen and just get a better idea for that.
Yep, can do that.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I do think the scope here is sizable in general. If we can hone in, that's going to be helpful. I see the bigger picture as we say we're interested in adaptive management, yet we set up many different layers of planning, which effectively make it impossible. Anytime the data might suggest that we would want to do something adaptive, and we're going to have to go deeper than that and get very specific on this particular instance of that occurrence. Is that fair to say, Karen?
I'm not sure what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree with the statement you just made, but you know, I have no intention of getting in to the weeds on this tonight, because I think it would add more than 5 or 10 minutes to this agenda.
Right, and my point is, at the end of this, are you basically hoping to see a recommendation about adaptive management?
I was not looking at making a recommendation to staff in general. I was looking at making some revisions to this document specifically.
Okay, and just help me understand, this is a Voice Insight board update, information from the staff to us. And so to what end are we gonna have updates to our own update, essentially? I don't believe this document is not headed to council. It's not moving beyond, I'm just trying to get clear on where the end.
I have
end
some
game is.
questions. I have some questions about how it has addressed the priorities in the master plan. And or not. And also how it has addressed how it has defined an adaptive management strategy. And when I use the word adaptive management, I'm using the Department of Interior's definition of adaptive management.
Okay. And I guess I'm worried about using the full board and staff's time to modify the update. If there's a desire to move towards something the board would consideration for action or recommendation, I think that merits everybody's time. But for what you just said, would it be better to just share your feelings on that directly with the authors? And frankly, I think I understand, or I think I understand where you're headed, and generally support the idea myself. I do just need to be clear as we talk to Dan about the agenda and the trade-offs of other important issues about what we're attempting to do.
Can I jump in here as well? So when you get to the end of the document and it says anticipated next steps, under RRSE 1, it says here, continue implementing measures from approved plans to mitigate impacts of increasing visitation in specific locations, while also updating the system-wide visitor use management plan. And I know that that's something that's going to be discussed in the retreat. So knowing that that's something that staff wants to bring up in the retreat, are we saying that we don't really know what we're doing with the Voice Insight, and we're going to kind of pause it at this point because we know that a recreation management plan is looming, and that document being created will kind of make the framework for this one? Is that, Dan, is that kind of what staff is thinking with that, or am I completely off, which is okay too?
Yeah, you're a little off. I think the idea for the conversations around rec management and the increase in visitation was suggested by board members. So, and in terms of staff thinking we need to change or put the program on pause while we wait for something, that wouldn't be accurate.
I guess what I meant to say with that, like the campaigns would go on, but as far as like, are we done and completed with surveying dog and leash use at this time? Is that why this written memo was given to us, because all of that was completed, or no?
Well,
so, Dan, I can jump in a little bit. And so I think to help, and kind of where you're going, Caroline, with the pause pieces, we are still going to be active. And I think the update was trying to provide that there are various actions we feel we can continue to take that are consistent with current kind of objectives and policy guidance around the Voice Insight tag. So again, focusing on how can we do better signage, outreach, communication around what's currently now the fall seasonal on leash restrictions for bear activity. And so certainly there's a number of different action steps that we're continuing to try to pilot and implement around the Voice Insight tag program, but those are still within policy. And so we feel that's our adaptive zone right now to continue to pilot and take actions there. I think where there's been interest is in perhaps when we're taking a broader look at the overall program, that's where we probably need to think about how does this fit within the overall and overarching conversations we're going to be having with a rec management plan and thinking about and to Karen's point, the adaptive management, the goals we're trying to achieve for a variety of different aspects of dog management, let alone a lot of other recreational activities and how they sit and where we're trying to achieve those various management objectives around those for our system. That's something that's best put in that context of looking in a more comprehensive way with a kind of a planning process and a public engagement process behind it too. And so I think that's where we're saying it's not where, if we didn't have kind of a opportunity here with a rec plan forthcoming, we might say in a different time or a different way, saying we need to now open up and look at the voice and sight tag in a much broader way, really look at those policy pieces independently. But we really have this right opportunity in coming up to us that it's the right way to link it in. So it is more comprehensive. And that's going to be the right way to start looking at that. And I think some of the conversation at the retreat might help a lot with that. Some of the conversation about, increasing visitation, adaptive management, that's not applying only to the voice and sight tag, but how we apply it in many ways. And what do we do for setting objectives, goals? How do we assess, do we achieve those? And there may be an opportunity to move forward and recalibrate how we look at dog management and voice and sight, but that should be done in the context of that broader planning effort, if that helps a little bit.
Yeah, it strikes to me that this is a good example of a conversation we might want to have at the retreat. As an example of the broader, concepts that we're interested in discussing. So I would suggest that we include this as an example of a conversation in the retreat, and perhaps not necessarily have it come back to the October 13th board meeting at this
Well,
point.
I was just gonna follow Steve's comment with the flip of what you said, Dave, because I think we could benefit a lot from a shorter discussion specifically around this example to presage the retreat and enable us to do the kind of advanced thinking that Michelle is advocating, and I agree with you, Michelle, on that. By looking at this specific example briefly at the October meeting. And I'd be happy to get together with Steve ahead of then to make sure that it's something that can be bit and chewed within the context of an October agenda.
Was that a dog joke, Karen?
Yeah.
I'm too tired for that.
The thing I want to be careful about setting up a precedent of opening up discussions on updates to the board. I'm open to the idea of a board member saying, I think that staff has erred in this way, and I'd like to see if the rest of the board agrees with me or not, which is an action-oriented step. I'm open to
I think, Hal, I think what you just said perfectly describes what I would like to do.
Okay. So I will work with Dan. Let's bring up a specific itemization of those things, and let's just be ready to present it concisely. And rather than so much being a discussion, we'll just find out whether the rest of the board agrees on those general sentiments or not. And that feels to me like we're then conducting business as opposed to just adding a discussion on the update. Because we need to tease out whether or not there's some consensus here. Because if there's not consensus, then we don't need to use a lot of the board and staff's time. And if there is consensus, then maybe we should explore some specific guidance about adaptive management within voice and sight. Both of those themes like productive use of time. Is that fair? We don't have time in October to have a retreat style co-creation which I think is very important in what we want to do in the retreat. But I just know in October, we do not have the capacity to do that.
And I understand that.
Okay. All right, Dan, when we get into the agenda setting, let's look and see what these other items are. And at the least, Karen, let's establish a matters from the board where you're ready to present on what you think is wrong with the document really quickly and concisely.
Okay, and I'd rather not frame it in what's wrong with the document. I'd rather frame it in terms of questions about the document.
Okay. Great, but the point is we've spent 20 minutes and we still don't have the. I mean, you kind of pointed at roughly, but if we have really specific questions, then we can cover that ground.
Okay.
Great, Michelle.
One just comment about the document. We did get a pandemic dog last September, and the kids and I took the online training and we did the quiz together. And I just have to tell you that it is awesome. And when we do go out for a hike, which he's not allowed off leash right now, because my kids know the rules. And they know, like, well, if he's not paying attention, he should not be off leash. And so I just want to say that it was excellent training. It is excellent training. The quiz at the end, you're not allowed to skip. And, you know, if you get it wrong, you got to go back over, and it just held our whole family accountable to the rules of the program, the privilege that you have to participate in this program. So I just want to say, well done. I hope you keep the online format, even past the pandemic. I know you were developing it before the pandemic, but I do hope that you keep that. And I just want to say good job.
And then just to add from what Karen said, and to include what Michelle was saying about pre-planning, I think for all of the board members, it would perhaps behoove us to look into the Department of the Interior Adaptive Management program policies, whatever the right word is, and see if we all have the time before these meetings and discussions to know what that looks like, since it seems like that might be some sort of framework to that. So I just wanted to throw that out there in the interest of shining light to Michelle's very wise comment, just to do a little bit of homework prior.
If I could, I think the master plan actually points to a visitor use management guideline that we've adopted. Yeah. So if it's possible to look at that document, familiarize yourself, that might be beneficial.
And that's different than adaptive management in the definition of Department of Interior, but I agree with you, that's another useful document.
Okay, great. Any other questions or comments for the good of the order? Wonderful. Well, we certainly appreciate everybody's time and participation this evening. Thank you to all the staff members. Certainly the climate report was, I thought, very engaging and interesting. The preparation was exceptional. And yes, thank you all for being here, and have a wonderful evening.
Thanks, everyone.